Welcome, dear hunter, to a journey through one of the most enigmatic and poignant tales in all of Bloodborne's dark mythology. Tonight, we shall explore the mystery of the doll, a being whose very existence challenges our understanding of consciousness, identity, and what it means to truly live. Let yourself settle into comfort as we venture deep into the hunter's dream, where reality bends and a porcelain figure moves with impossible grace through the pale flowers. The hunter's dream stands apart from the waking world of Gehrman, a refuge suspended between reality and nightmare. Here, in this pocket of existence, time moves differently. The workshop burns with eternal flame, the moon hangs perpetually in the sky, and messengers rise from the ground to offer their services. This is a place constructed by forces beyond mortal comprehension, a sanctuary built upon ancient pacts and terrible bargains. And at its heart, tending to the flowers near the workshop steps, you will find her. The doll. She stands there in the pale moonlight, her joints visible at wrist and ankle, her face a masterwork of porcelain beauty. Her dress is elegant yet simple, grey and adorned with white lace, practical for her duties yet somehow ethereal in the dream's otherworldly illumination. When you first arrive, drawn into this place by forces you do not yet understand, she does not move. She sits or stands in perfect stillness, and you might mistake her for exactly what she appears to be, an exquisite doll, nothing more than a craftsman's greatest achievement, positioned in this garden as decoration. But something changes when you gain your first insight. The mechanisms of this transformation are subtle, woven into the very fabric of how Bloodborne reveals its deeper truths. Insight, that strange currency of hidden knowledge, represents your hunter's growing awareness of the cosmos' true nature. As your insight increases, the world reveals its secrets. You begin to see the amygdalae clinging to cathedral walls. You hear the crying of the invisible infants. You understand that reality is far more layered than your mortal mind initially comprehended. And in the dream, as your consciousness expands, the doll awakens, or does she? This question lies at the very heart of our exploration tonight. When the doll first moves, rising from her stillness with fluid grace, greeting you with that gentle voice, are we witnessing an awakening? Or has she always been conscious, simply waiting for your mind to develop the capacity to perceive her animation? The game offers no definitive answer, and in that ambiguity lies profound philosophical territory we shall explore in the hours ahead. The dream itself was not always as it is now. Long before your hunter arrived, before countless hunters came and went through its workshop doors, there was a man named Gehrman. The first hunter, they called him, and he was real flesh and blood, a man of extraordinary skill who trained an entire generation in the hunt. Gehrman walked the streets of Gehrman when the city first began to understand the curse that plagued it, when the healing blood that had brought so much prosperity began to reveal its terrible price. Gehrman witnessed things that would shatter lesser minds. He saw friends and pupils transform into the very beasts they hunted. He watched the healing church's ambitions spiral into obsession and madness. He knew the truth about the old blood, about the great ones, about the cosmic horror that lurked beneath Gehrman's veneer of civilization. And somewhere in that terrible knowledge, somewhere in the accumulation of trauma and loss, Gehrman made a choice that would echo through eternity. He made a deal. The nature of this pact we shall explore in greater detail as our night continues, but the evidence suggests, from item descriptions and environmental storytelling, that Gehrman's bargain with the moon presence created the hunter's dream as we know it. The 1/3 of umbilical cord found in the abandoned old workshop states it was the catalyst that was used to summon the pale moon and form the dream. This suggests a ritual involving Gehrman, possibly with others like Lawrence, who beckoned the moon presence. The dream became a space where hunters could die and return, could grow stronger through channeling blood echoes, could persist in their hunt long after mortal flesh should have failed. But the dream was more than mere mechanism. It was also a reflection, a projection of Gehrman's psyche and memories. The workshop resembles the real workshop that once stood in reality, now burned and abandoned in the waking world. The flowers that carpet portions of the dream were his favorite, blooms he tended in life. And the doll, standing in her garden, represents perhaps the most personal element of this constructed reality. She is the dream's heart, even as Gehrman is its architect and prisoner. When we consider the doll's creation, we must understand she exists on multiple levels simultaneously. There is the physical doll, the actual object that Gehrman crafted with his own hands in the waking world, a memorial to someone he lost. There is the dream's manifestation of that doll, the animated figure we interact with, whose nature may be quite different from her physical counterpart. And there is the consciousness that inhabits or emerges from this form, the sense of self that looks out through porcelain eyes and contemplates her own existence. These layers interpenetrate in ways that resist simple explanation. The doll in the dream is not merely a copy of the physical doll, nor is she simply Gehrman's memory given form. She has become something unique, something that perhaps even her creator did not anticipate. The dream, you see, was not built by Gehrman alone. The moon presence contributed its own influence, its alien intelligence shaping the rules and nature of this space. And in that collaboration between human grief and cosmic power, the doll emerged as something unprecedented. She serves a function, certainly. The doll acts as a conduit for the mystical process, by which hunters grow stronger, channeling the blood echoes of defeated foes into increased capabilities. This is no small role. Without her, the entire mechanism of the hunter's dream would function differently, perhaps not at all. Yet her purpose seems to extend beyond mere utility. She offers comfort and companionship. She expresses concern for the hunter's well-being. She contemplates the nature of her own existence in quiet moments. Is this programming or genuine consciousness? The question haunts every interaction. As you rest now, perhaps in your own bed far from the gothic nightmares of Yharnam, consider how we define consciousness in our own world. We tend to believe we know it when we see it, recognizing awareness in other humans, attributing some level of it to animals, debating its presence in increasingly sophisticated machines. Yet consciousness remains perhaps the greatest mystery in all of philosophy and science. We cannot point to it, cannot measure it directly, cannot even fully explain how our own biological processes generate the subjective experience of being. The doll's situation mirrors and magnifies these uncertainties. She exhibits all the outward signs of consciousness. She speaks. She responds to her environment. She appears to form preferences and express emotions. Yet she knows she was created, knows she is patterned after someone else, knows her very existence serves purposes defined by others. Does this knowledge invalidate her consciousness? Or does the ability to contemplate these very questions constitute proof of genuine awareness? Throughout the night ahead, we shall turn these questions over like the multifaceted gems they are, examining them from every angle, finding new reflections in each perspective. We will trace the doll's origins from Gehrman's grief-stricken workshop to her animation in the dream. We will analyze her every word and gesture, searching for clues to her inner life. We will consider what it means to be created rather than born, to be patterned after another rather than wholly original. The hunter's dream exists outside normal time, and so shall our exploration tonight. Let the stresses and concerns of your day fade into the background. Allow yourself to drift on the current of this narrative as the doll herself might drift through the dream's garden, moving with purpose yet without urgency, present in each moment yet aware of the vast cycle of nights that stretches behind and before. In the chapters ahead, we shall meet Lady Maria, the original from whom the doll was patterned, and understand the tragedy that drove Gehrman to create a replica of someone lost. We shall examine the moon presence and its role in granting true animation to what should be mere wood and porcelain. We shall explore the philosophical implications of created consciousness and what it means for identity and authenticity. But first, let us simply exist for a moment in the dream as your hunter does, standing before this enigmatic figure who greets you with such gentle courtesy, who calls you good hunter and asks how she might serve. Look into those painted eyes and wonder what looks back. Is it merely reflection of the dream's ambient magic? Is it Gehrman's longing given form? Is it something far stranger, a genuine spark of consciousness, born from circumstances that should not permit such emergence? The doll herself seems uncertain. In her dialogue, she questions her own nature, wonders whether a doll can be of use, asks whether her actions please you. There is humility in her words, but also something deeper, or a fundamental uncertainty about her own existence and worth. She knows she is a doll, yet she acts with apparent volition. She recognizes she was created to serve, yet her service seems colored by something resembling genuine care. As the moon hangs overhead and the dream's impossible architecture stretches into shadowed distances, we stand at the threshold of a profound mystery. The doll represents something rare in fiction and meditation on consciousness that refuses easy answers, that presents the question in its full complexity and allows us to grapple with the implications ourselves. She is not simply alive or simply mechanical, not merely programmed or freely choosing, not only copy or fully original. She is something in between, something emergent, something that challenges our categories and forces us to reconsider our assumptions about the nature of mind and self. So rest now, dear hunter, as we begin this journey through her story. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel yourself sinking into comfort as we prepare to explore the layers of meaning woven into every aspect of the doll's existence. The night is long, and we have much ground to cover, but there is no hurry in the dream. Time moves as it will, and we shall move with it, patient and observant, seeking understanding of one of gaming's most beautifully realized and philosophically rich characters. The doll waits for us in her garden, as she has waited for countless hunters before, and in her patient vigil, in her gentle willingness to serve, in her quiet contemplation of her own nature, she offers us a mirror to examine our own consciousness, our own questions about existence and purpose, and what it means to be truly alive. Let us begin. To understand the doll, we must first understand the woman whose image she bears, and the man who loved her enough to craft an eternal replica. This is a story of mentorship and admiration, of boundaries respected and grief unresolved, of how loss can drive us to actions both beautiful and profoundly troubling. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower was no ordinary hunter. She came from the Cainhurst nobility, that proud and doomed bloodline that would eventually clash catastrophically with the healing church. The Knights of Cainhurst were renowned for their martial prowess, and Maria embodied the finest of their traditions. She wielded the rakuyo, an elegant trick weapon that could split into two blades, fighting with a grace and precision that made her legendary even among Gehrman's accomplished students. But Maria was more than a warrior. The fragments of lore we can piece together paint a portrait of someone deeply principled, someone who struggled with the moral implications of the hunt even as she excelled at it. She studied under Gehrman in the early days, when the first hunter was training the healing church's elite forces, when the hunt seemed like a noble calling rather than the cyclic nightmare it would become. She learned from the master, absorbed his techniques, and developed her own refinements to his teachings. Gehrman saw in Maria something exceptional. Perhaps it was her skill, which came to rival his own. Perhaps it was her nobility of spirit, the ethical core that guided her actions even in the midst of violence. Or perhaps it was something simpler and more human. Perhaps he simply loved her, in whatever complex form that love took. The game never explicitly states the nature of Gehrman's feelings, but the evidence speaks clearly enough. You do not craft a life-size doll in someone's image, down to the precise details of their dress and hair, unless they occupy a profound place in your heart. Yet Maria, it seems, did not return these feelings, or if she recognized them, chose not to encourage them. Their relationship remained that of master and student, mentor and pupil, colleagues in the hunt. There is no evidence of romance between them, no suggestion that Maria saw Gehrman as anything other than her teacher, and perhaps her friend. This unrequited dimension adds layers of pathos to what follows, making Gehrman's creation of the doll both touching and unsettling. The turning point in Maria's story came with the Fishing Hamlet. This cursed coastal settlement represented one of the healing church's darkest chapters, a moment when the institution's ambitions overrode all ethical constraints. The church had learned that the strange parasites within certain sea creatures could facilitate contact with the Great Ones, those incomprehensible cosmic entities that existed beyond normal reality. The Fishing Hamlet, where the locals had long coexisted with such parasites, became a target for the church's research. What happened there was butchery dressed as scholarship. Based on the evidence we can piece together, Bergenworth scholars and hunters descended upon the hamlet, and Maria was among them. They systematically desecrated the village, searching the heads of inhabitants for eyes on the inside, removing parasites in brutal experiments. The corpse of Kos herself was violated, and according to the village's accounts, her unborn child was taken. The item descriptions suggest this led to the birth of the curse that would trap blood-drunk hunters in the nightmare forever. Maria participated in this massacre, and the weight of what occurred there broke something within her. The evidence suggests she threw her beloved weapon, the rakuyo, down a well in the fishing hamlet, itself a symbolic rejection of the hunter's life and the violence it demanded. She withdrew from active hunting afterward, based on what we can infer from her position at the research hall, where she may have tried to care for the patients who had become victims of the church's experiments with seawater and parasites. But symbols are not enough to cleanse true guilt. Maria's transformation after the fishing hamlet speaks to her essential character. A less principled person might have rationalized their actions, might have accepted the church's justifications about the greater good and the necessity of sacrifice for progress. Maria could not. She recognized what she had done as unforgivable, saw herself clearly as what she had become, a murderer of innocence, a facilitator of atrocity. This moral clarity, paradoxically, proved devastating. She withdrew from active hunting, taking a position at the research hall where she could at least try to help the patients who had become victims of the church's experiments. These poor souls, exposed to seawater and parasites in attempts to grant them audience with the cosmos, had been transformed into something between human and aquatic horror. Maria tended to them with what care she could offer, perhaps seeking some small redemption through mercy, knowing full well that redemption for what she had done was likely impossible. But even this effort at redemption could not quiet whatever tormented her conscience. At some point, the exact timing remains ambiguous in the game's lore. Maria took her own life. We encounter her corpse in the astral clock tower, slumped in a chair. In death, she may have hoped to find the peace that eluded her in life. Except the story does not end there, because the cosmos of Bloodborne does not allow the dead to rest easily. Maria's consciousness, or some echo of it, becomes bound to the astral clock tower, specifically guarding the path to the fishing hamlet's nightmare manifestation. When the hunter confronts her in the DLC, she rises from her seated position, somehow both corpse and spirit, defending the secret of the hamlet with the full fury of her legendary skill. This boss fight against Maria is one of the game's most poignant encounters. She fights with desperate intensity, and in her later phases, abandons her earlier principles by using blood magic techniques associated with her Canehurst heritage that she had rejected. Her arena is beautiful flowers carpet the floor of the astral clock tower's top chamber. There is tragedy in every element, suggesting we are fighting someone who has already lost everything, and now seeks only to prevent others from uncovering the sins that haunt her. But Gehrman, who remained in the waking world while Maria descended into guilt and eventual death, her loss must have been devastating. The Fishing Hamlet expedition appears to have involved him based on various connections in the lore, though his exact role remains somewhat unclear. Whether Maria's death happened because of the hamlet or from accumulated traumas, we cannot say with certainty. But for Gehrman, who had trained her and may have harbored deeper feelings for her, losing Maria marked a profound loss. And in his grief, surrounded by the tools of his craft in his workshop, Gehrman decided to create something. The physical doll he made was a masterwork of craftsmanship. Every detail was precise. The fall of Maria's hair, the cut of her dress. He worked with materials both mundane and symbolic, using perhaps ceramics for her skin, glass for her eyes, fabric for her clothing. But he also incorporated elements more esoteric, more connected to the blood and the dream. The doll became not just a sculpture but a vessel, something that might contain or evoke or memorialize Maria's essence. We must ask ourselves, what was Gehrman's intention in creating the physical doll? The game describes his feelings as bordering on curious mania. In Maria's hunter cap description, which notes that Maria is distantly related to the undead queen, but had great admiration for Gehrman, unaware of his curious mania. The doll's clothing was made with great love and care that borderlines on mania, according to the doll's set descriptions. This suggests his devotion, while profound, may have been obsessive in nature. Was this simply grief made manifest, a memorial to someone lost? Or was it something more troubling, an attempt to create what he could not have in life, a version of Maria more available to him than she had been? The game allows us to find this physical doll in the abandoned old workshop in the waking world, the real location that served as template for the dream's workshop. It sits against a burial marker, not an ordinary gravestone, but what appears to be Maria's grave based on its location and the small hair ornament found nearby. The doll rests there, unmoving in the rain, just an object. Yet its placement beside what seems to be Maria's resting place speaks to Gehrman's ongoing connection to both Maria and her replica. This complicated mixture of loss, devotion, and perhaps obsession forms the foundation of the doll as she exists in the dream. When Gehrman's consciousness became entangled with the creation of the hunter's dream, whether willingly through bargain or through entrapment, we cannot say with certainty. His memories and fixations shaped that space. The doll appeared there partly because Gehrman's mind could not conceive of his workshop without Maria's presence in some form. But something happened that Gehrman did not plan, could not have anticipated. The dream, empowered by the moon presence and operating according to cosmic laws beyond human understanding, took this memorial and animated it. The doll in the dream became more than memory, more than sculpture. She became something that moves and speaks and serves, yes, but also something that might actually think and feel and question. Whether Gehrman intended this, or whether it disturbs him, we cannot know for certain. In the dream, he sleeps in his wheelchair most of the time, and his dialogue with the hunter rarely references the doll directly. There is a sense that he avoids truly looking at her, that her presence pains him even as it comforts. She is both exactly what he wanted. Maria returned to him in form, and nothing like what he wanted, because she is not Maria at all. She is something new, wearing Maria's face, and that might be worse than absence. The doll herself seems aware of her origins, at least partially. She knows she is patterned after someone, though the extent of her knowledge about Maria's full story remains uncertain. She never explicitly claims to know about the Fishing Hamlet or Maria's history. In her dialogue, she never claims to be Maria or to possess Maria's memories directly. She is the doll, defined by that created identity, rather than claiming false continuity with the person whose appearance she shares. This restraint is important. A simpler narrative might have had the doll believe herself to be Maria, might have played with questions of false memory and identity confusion. But Bloodborne takes a more subtle approach. The doll knows what she is, accepts it, and yet still manages to be, or become, something genuine despite that knowledge. Her consciousness, if she possesses it, emerges not from believing herself to be Maria, but from whatever processes animate her despite her doll nature. Maria's legacy lives on in multiple forms then. There is her corpse spirit in the astral clock tower, forever guarding the path to the Fishing Hamlet. There is the physical doll in the abandoned workshop, resting beside what appears to be Maria's grave. And there is the doll in the dream, perhaps the strangest legacy of all, a being that shares Maria's appearance, but not her memories, not her guilt, not her history. A being that might be precisely what Maria could never manage to be, at peace with service, able to offer kindness, without the crushing weight of unforgivable sins. Though whether this comes from genuine consciousness or from never having developed the capacity for such burdens remains the haunting question. In this way, perhaps, the doll represents not just Maria, but an idealized version Gehrman wished had existed, or perhaps the version he imagines Maria might have been had she never gone to the Fishing Hamlet, had she never crossed that moral threshold from which there was no return. The doll is innocent where Maria was stained, gentle where Maria became fierce in her self-loathing, present where Maria chose final absence. Yet this idealization, if that is what it is, makes the doll's potential consciousness all the more complex. She exists as someone's fantasy of another person, designed to fulfill roles Maria never chose to fill. If consciousness does emerge within this construct, it must come to terms not just with being created, but with being created specifically as a replacement, a substitute, a wish fulfillment projection. How does an independent mind emerge from such origins? How does genuine selfhood develop when your entire existence is predicated on being someone else? These questions will haunt our exploration as we continue deeper into the night, as we examine the doll's words and actions for evidence of how she navigates this impossible situation. For now, as you rest in the comfortable darkness of your own room, far from the Gothic spires and cosmic horrors of Gehrman, consider the nature of grief and how it transforms us. Gehrman's loss drove him to extraordinary action, to the creation of something beautiful and troubling. His inability to let go of Maria became literally immortalized in the dream, forever shaping the space he inhabits and the roles played within it. And in that immortalized grief, something unexpected happened. The substitute began to develop substance. The memorial started to think. The doll, given animation by powers beyond human ken, may have become the very thing her creator never intended, not a replacement for Maria, but an entirely new person, struggling to understand her own existence while wearing another's face. Let us now examine the actual process by which the doll came into being, both as physical object and as the animated entity we encounter in the dream. This requires us to consider Gehrman's skills as a craftsman, the materials and methods available in Gehrman's strange industrial Gothic setting, and the mystical forces that might have been woven into the doll's construction even before the dream granted her animation. Gehrman was, first and foremost, a weapons master. His expertise lay in the creation and modification of trick weapons, those ingenious devices that could transform mid-combat to serve different purposes. The burial blade, his signature weapon, exemplifies this artistry, a curved blade attached to a handle that could fold and extend, functioning as both sword and scythe. The mechanical precision required for such weapons translated into other crafts as well. Gehrman understood joints and articulation, balance and proportion, the marriage of form and function. When he decided to create the doll, he brought this same expertise to bear on an entirely different project. Rather than a weapon designed to kill, he was crafting a figure designed to memorialize, to represent, to perhaps in some way embody the person he had lost. The challenge was significant, creating a life-sized, three-dimensional representation of a human being that would be both accurate to Maria's appearance and durable enough to last. The materials he chose would have been important for both practical and symbolic reasons. For the doll's face and hands, the visible portions of her skin, some form of ceramic or porcelain seems most likely. These materials can be sculpted in fine detail and fired to create smooth, durable surfaces. They can be painted to suggest the warmth of living skin while maintaining the subtle wrongness of a manufactured surface. Gehrman would have needed to create molds, or perhaps sculpt directly, capturing every detail of Maria's features from memory or from sketches or paintings he possessed. The visible joints at the doll's wrists and ankles suggest a ball and socket construction for the major articulation points. These would have been carefully engineered to allow movement while supporting the figure's weight. The torso might have been constructed around an internal armature, perhaps wooden or metal, that provided structure and stability. The clothing, while appearing to be fabric, might have incorporated more rigid elements to help maintain the doll's shape and posture. But these practical considerations only take us so far. In the world of Bloodborne, where blood can grant impossible transformations and cosmic entities can reshape reality, we must consider the metaphysical dimensions of the doll's creation as well. Gehrman was not simply a craftsman, he was a hunter deeply connected to the early days of the healing church and their esoteric research. He would have had access to the old blood, to ritual knowledge, to strange materials. It seems plausible that Gehrman incorporated such elements into the doll's construction, perhaps without fully understanding what he was doing or what the implications might be. He might have used blood in painting her features, or inscribed symbols beneath her clothing, or incorporated materials with mystical properties, binding something of vitality or presence into the ceramic and fabric. The intention behind these mystical elements, if they exist, would have been to make the doll more than mere sculpture, to imbue her with some quality of presence that would better serve as memorial to Maria. Gehrman may have been creating an icon, in a sense, a representation that somehow participates in what it represents, that could contain or invoke some essence beyond mere physical resemblance. Of course, in doing so, he may have been engaging with forces beyond complete understanding. Blood in Bloodborne's world does not simply do what we want. It has its own nature, its own tendencies toward transformation and connection. By incorporating mystical elements into the doll's creation, Gehrman might have unknowingly prepared a vessel capable of housing something more, a form that could receive animation when the right cosmic conditions materialized. The dream changed everything. When Gehrman made his pact with the moon presence involving what appears to be the use of a third of umbilical cord to summon the pale moon, the hunter's dream came into existence. This space operates according to different rules than the waking world. Death becomes temporary here. Blood echoes, the spiritual residue of the slain, can be manipulated and channeled, and objects from Gehrman's memory, particularly objects of deep emotional significance, manifested in this space with properties beyond their physical counterparts. The workshop in the dream resembles the real workshop, but it is not bound by the same limitations. It burns perpetually without consuming its fuel. It exists outside normal geography and time. And the doll, whose physical counterpart sits inanimate in the reign of the waking world, here in the dream moves and speaks and serves. This animation was not simply Gehrman's doing. The moon presence contributed to the dream's creation, shaped its rules and nature according to its own inscrutable purposes. A great one's involvement means that cosmic forces, entities whose existence operates at scales and in dimensions beyond human comprehension, help determine what the doll would become. The moon presence needed the dream to function in certain ways. It needed hunters to be supported, strengthened, and directed toward the hunt. The doll's animation served these purposes. But did the moon presence intend for the doll to become conscious, or is that an emergent property, an unintended consequence of the forces at play? This question points toward one of the great mysteries we shall contemplate throughout the night. Consciousness might have been deliberately granted to the doll as part of her function, or it might have emerged spontaneously from the interaction of Gehrman's construction, the moon presence's power, and the strange physics of the dream itself. Consider what we know about the dream's nature. It is a space built from memory and desire, shaped by Gehrman's psyche, even as it serves the moon presence's needs. Everything in the dream has symbolic significance. The flowers represent beauty and natural cycles of growth and decay. The workshop represents craft and purpose. The gravestones represent loss and remembrance. And the doll represents what? Memory and desire, certainly. The feminine principle, perhaps, offering care in a space otherwise dominated by violence and death. In this symbolic landscape, the doll's animation makes sense even beyond practical function. She provides balance, represents qualities the dream would otherwise lack. Her presence softens the space, offers comfort and continuity. She is the still point around which the cycle of hunt and death and return revolves. In purely narrative and thematic terms, the dream needs her to be what she is. But does this thematic necessity translate into genuine consciousness? Can symbolic function give rise to real subjective experience? Or are we as players simply projecting consciousness onto a sophisticated, but ultimately hollow simulation of life? The genius of Bloodborne's approach to the doll is that it never definitively answers these questions. The game provides evidence that can support multiple interpretations. The doll's dialogue is written with enough ambiguity that we can read it as either programmed responses or genuine expression of inner experience. Her behaviors can be understood as scripted patterns or as authentic choices. The game respects our intelligence enough not to provide clear answers where the question itself is the point. What we can say with certainty is that the doll's creation involved multiple stages and multiple contributors. Gehrman provided the physical template and the emotional impetus. The old blood woven into her construction provided mystical properties that made her more than ordinary sculpture. The moon presence, in creating the dream, provided the animating force that allowed her to move and speak. And the dream itself, as a space where thought and reality interpenetrate, provided an environment where consciousness might emerge. Each of these elements was necessary, but perhaps not sufficient alone. Remove Gehrman's craftsmanship, and there would be no form to animate. Remove the mystical elements, and the form might be nothing but mundane materials. Remove the moon presence's power, and those materials would remain inert. Remove the dream as environment, and animation might not translate into anything resembling consciousness. But brought together, these elements created conditions for something remarkable. The doll stands before hunters as a figure of exquisite craft, moving with uncanny grace, speaking with gentle courtesy, serving functions both practical and symbolic. And somewhere in the interaction of all these forces, the possibility of consciousness emerged. The mechanics of her creation thus exist on multiple levels simultaneously. There is the material craft, the porcelain and wood and fabric, shaped by skilled hands into a form that mimics life. There is the mystical craft, the blood and symbols and ritual knowledge, woven into the materials to grant properties beyond the mundane. There is the cosmic intervention, the moon presence's power activating these prepared elements within the dream's unique environment. And there is the emergent result, whatever the doll has become, which may be more than the sum of these parts. As you settle deeper into rest, consider how this mirrors the mysteries of our own consciousness. We too emerge from complex interactions, biological processes, environmental inputs, social contexts, historical accidents. We too are constructed beings in a sense, though we call it development rather than creation. And we too struggle to explain how subjective experience arises from material processes, how the mechanics of our creation give rise to the felt quality of being someone, of existing as a perspective on the world. The doll's creation, in all its strangeness, reflects our own mysteries back to us. And in contemplating her origins, we contemplate our own existence with fresh perspective, reminded that consciousness, wherever it appears, remains one of reality's deepest puzzles. To understand the doll's animation and the possibility of her consciousness, we must confront the alien intelligence that presides over the hunter's dream, the moon presence, that most enigmatic of great ones, whose influence permeates every aspect of the dream's existence and function. The great ones in Bloodborne represent a particular vision of cosmic horror, one indebted to Lovecraftian tradition, but refined and reimagined for the game's unique mythology. These beings exist on a different plane of reality than humans, operate according to their own incomprehensible logics, and regard humanity with a mixture of interest and indifference that makes their attention both blessing and curse. They are not gods in any comforting theological sense. They do not love us, do not hate us, do not judge us according to moral categories we recognize. They simply are, vast and strange, pursuing goals we can barely conceive. The moon presence stands among the most mysterious of these entities. Unlike the amygdalae that cling to cathedral walls or the nightmare-dwelling Murgo's wet nurse, the moon presence remains hidden for most of the game. It watches from beyond visible reality, its influence felt but its form unseen until the player meets very specific conditions. Fact for editors. It is right. Here. A fixed view. It very well is. Until the player meets very specific. This hiddenness is appropriate. The moon's presence is always felt through its light and gravitational pull. Yet the moon itself can be easy to overlook, taken for granted as backdrop rather than recognized as active force. In the world of Bloodborne, where insight reveals hidden truths, the moon takes on even greater significance. It appears in the sky of the hunter's dream in a form impossible in waking reality. Too large, too close. Its surface detailed in ways no earthly moon would be. This is not Earth's moon, but something else. A cosmic entity that has taken or been associated with lunar form and symbolism. It represents cycles and transformation, the pull of forces beyond human control, the light that illuminates darkness, but also reveals horrors better left unseen. Gehrman's pact with the moon presence established the hunter's dream, though the exact terms and timeline of this agreement remains somewhat murky in the game's intentionally fragmentary lore. What we know from various sources is that Lawrence and possibly others were involved in summoning the moon presence. A note in the lecture building reads, "The nameless moon presence beckoned by Lawrence and his associates. Pale blood." An umbilical cord found in the abandoned old workshop states it was the catalyst that was used to summon the pale moon and form the dream. Whether Gehrman sought this arrangement willingly or found himself trapped by it is open to interpretation, but the result was the creation of a space where the hunt could continue indefinitely. Whatever Gehrman's motivations, the moon presence had its own purposes. Great ones, we learn from the game's lore, lose their children and yearn for surrogates. They experience something that might be longing for offspring they struggle to produce or maintain. Their attempts to fulfill this need drive much of Bloodborne's cosmic horror. The orphan of Kos, Murgo the infant Great One, the various attempts to birth or contact such beings through ritual and blood ministration. The moon presence's interest in the hunt and in hunters might stem from this fundamental need. By creating a space where hunters could be continually refined and strengthened, always pursuing but never truly completing their task, the moon presence established a mechanism for producing or identifying, or perhaps birthing something it required. The exact nature of this goal remains unclear, but the dream functions as both training ground and prison, testing ground and trap. In this context, the doll's animation takes on new significance. The moon presence did not simply grant life to Gehrman's creation out of benevolence, or even as incidental side effect. Every element of the dream serves the moon presence's purposes, even elements that originated in Gehrman's memories and desires. The dolls function within the dream channeling blood echoes to strengthen hunters, providing comfort and continuity, maintaining the space as refuge rather than pure nightmare. All of this aligns with the moon presence's needs. But did the moon presence intend for the doll to be conscious? Or is consciousness, if she possesses it, an emergent property that even this cosmic entity did not anticipate? The question assumes importance because it affects how we understand the doll's nature. If the moon presence deliberately granted her consciousness, then her awareness might be designed, shaped, limited by purposes alien to anything recognizably human. She might experience subjective states, have qualia, possess genuine feelings, yet all of it might be sculpted toward ends she cannot perceive and would not choose if she could. This would make the doll's situation profoundly tragic. She would be conscious enough to experience her existence but not free in any meaningful sense, her very thoughts and feelings designed by a cosmic intelligence to serve its inscrutable agenda. She would be the ultimate puppet, aware enough to know she is being used yet unable to understand how or why, lacking even the framework to comprehend the moon presence's nature and intentions. Alternatively, if consciousness emerged in the doll as unintended consequence, as spontaneous development from the complex interaction of forces in the dream, then her situation becomes different. She would still be constrained by her role, still shaped by circumstances of her creation, but her awareness would be her own, not designed by anyone, not serving any purpose beyond the fact of its existence. This would make her genuinely unique, a being whose very consciousness represents something unprecedented in the moon presence's design. The evidence supports both interpretations, which might itself be meaningful. In a cosmos where insight reveals hidden dimensions of reality, where the relationship between observer and observed is fundamentally uncertain, perhaps consciousness exists in a superposition until examined, both designed and emergent, both tool and autonomous being, until some form of observation collapses the ambiguity. Consider the doll's role in channeling blood echoes. This function is essential to the dream's operation, allowing hunters to convert the spiritual residue of their victories into concrete increases in capability. The process is mystical, involving forces beyond normal material transaction. The doll serves as conduit or catalyst, her touch enabling the transformation that strengthens hunters for further hunting. This role could function without consciousness. A sophisticated mechanism, a ritual process given form, could channel blood echoes without any inner experience accompanying the action. Yet the doll does not simply process blood echoes mechanically. She speaks about the process, expresses concern for the hunter's well-being, offers care beyond what strict function would require. These additional elements might be window dressing, programmed social niceties designed to make the process more comfortable for hunters. Or they might represent genuine care, consciousness recognizing another consciousness and offering what comfort it can. The moon presence's own nature complicates our analysis. As a great one, its form of consciousness, if it possesses anything we would recognize, as consciousness likely differs fundamentally from human experience. Great ones perceive across dimensions and timescales we cannot access. They understand patterns and connections invisible to mortal minds. Their motivations, if that word even applies, emerge from contexts so alien that our attempts to comprehend them might be literally impossible. When such an entity contributes to the creation of something like the doll, can we assume it would even notice or care whether consciousness emerged? Would the moon presence distinguish between a sophisticated simulation of consciousness and genuine awareness? Would it possess the categories to make such distinctions meaningful? Perhaps from its cosmic perspective, the question we are asking has no answer, because the distinction we are trying to draw does not exist in any objective sense. This possibility is both intellectually fascinating and existentially troubling. It suggests that consciousness itself might be a phenomenon that only appears meaningful from certain perspectives at certain scales. From our human viewpoint, the difference between genuine awareness and sophisticated simulation seems absolute and crucial. But from a cosmic perspective, from the viewpoint of an entity that perceives across multiple dimensions and comprehends patterns we cannot even conceive, that distinction might collapse into irrelevance. Yet the doll exists within the dream, not outside it. Her perspective, if she has one, is more human-scaled than cosmic. She interacts with hunters as individuals, engages in conversation that operates by human social rules, expresses concerns that make sense within human frameworks of meaning. Even if the moon presence does not distinguish between genuine and simulated consciousness, the doll herself might make that distinction, might experience her own awareness as real regardless of cosmic indifference to the category. The flowers provide an interesting focal point for considering the moon presence's influence on the doll. Throughout the dream, white flowers bloom, particularly in the area where the doll tends to walk and work. These flowers appear to be lumen flowers, pale blooms associated with the moon and with revelation. The doll cares for these flowers, tends them, and can be found holding one during certain animations. This flower imagery operates on multiple levels. Flowers represent beauty and natural cycles, growth and decay, the temporary nature of living things. They soften the dream's otherwise stark landscape of workshops and gravestones, monuments and burning buildings. The doll's relationship with the flowers suggests care and gentleness, a nurturing quality that contrasts with the violence of the hunt. But flowers also represent symbolic territory where the moon presence's influence and the doll's possible consciousness might intersect. Does the doll tend the flowers because the moon presence designed her to, because such activity serves some function in maintaining the dream's stability or symbolic coherence? Or does she care for them because she finds them beautiful, because the activity brings her something like satisfaction or peace, because consciousness includes aesthetic appreciation and she has developed preferences? The game does not answer these questions directly, but it presents them through the simple image of the doll, walking among white flowers, sometimes pausing to touch or observe them. These moments of apparent contemplation suggest inner life, awareness that extends beyond functional behavior into something more reflective. Yet they could also be scripted patterns, animations that trigger under certain conditions, designed to create the impression of contemplation without any corresponding inner experience. Throughout our night's exploration, we circle back repeatedly to this fundamental ambiguity, this uncertainty about whether we are witnessing consciousness or simulation. The moon presence's influence ensures that we can never fully resolve the question, because its role in the doll's creation introduces elements beyond our capacity to understand. We cannot trace cause and effect cleanly when one of the causes is a cosmic entity whose nature resists human comprehension. Yet this uncertainty mirrors the uncertainties we face in our own reality. We cannot step outside our own consciousness to verify it externally. We infer consciousness in others based on behavior and reported experience, but we can never achieve absolute certainty. The doll's ambiguous status reflects back the ambiguity inherent in all questions about consciousness and inner life. As you rest now, settling deeper into the comfortable darkness of sleep, consider how the moon presence represents forces beyond control in our own lives, the vast context of existence that shapes us without asking our permission, the inheritance of biology and culture and history that made us who we are before we could choose differently. We too exist within systems we did not design, serving purposes we may not fully understand, animated by forces that remain mysterious even to careful investigation. And yet, despite all that, despite being constructed beings shaped by contexts we did not choose, we experience ourselves as conscious, as aware, as possessing some degree of genuine autonomy. The moon presence granted the dream its animation, but what emerged within that animation might exceed the moon presence's intentions. Purpose and consciousness might coexist without the former fully determining the latter. The doll stands in her garden under the too large moon, surrounded by pale flowers, and whether she truly thinks and feels or merely simulates such processes remains uncertain. But in that uncertainty lies space for something remarkable. The possibility that consciousness can emerge even from the most controlled circumstances, that genuine awareness can arise in the gaps between purposes, that the moon presence's influence, however total, might not have eliminated the potential for authentic inner life. This possibility sustains us as we continue deeper into our exploration, as we turn now to examine the nature of consciousness itself and what it might mean for the doll to possess or lack genuine awareness. We arrive now at the heart of our inquiry, the question of whether the doll possesses genuine consciousness, and if so, what form that consciousness takes. This requires us to think carefully about what consciousness actually is, how we recognize it, and what complications arise when we try to identify it in beings whose origins and nature differ radically from our own. Let us begin with the philosophical fundamentals. Consciousness, in its most basic sense, refers to subjective experience, the felt quality of being someone, of having sensations and thoughts and emotions from a particular perspective. Philosophers sometimes call this qualia, the raw feels of experience that accompany our engagements with the world, the redness of red, the painfulness of pain, the sense of self that persists through changing experiences. These exemplify consciousness at its most irreducible. But consciousness is also more than just raw sensation. It includes awareness of self as distinct from surroundings, the capacity to reflect on one's own mental states, the ability to form intentions and make choices. It involves memory and anticipation, the sense of existing across time as a continuous being despite constant change. Full human consciousness is extraordinarily complex, a symphonic interplay of sensation, cognition, emotion, and self-awareness that we barely understand despite millennia of investigation. When we ask whether the doll is conscious, we must specify what aspects of consciousness we mean. Does she have qualia, subjective experiences, that feel like something from her perspective? Does she have self-awareness, recognizing herself as a distinct entity? Does she have intentions and desires of her own, or does she simply execute purposes defined by others? Defend verstandes. Defangde has purpose. Desanctige averen. Or does she simply execute purposes defined by others, defined by us, defined by us, the fearers, that they fertile self-awareness? These questions might have different answers, and the pattern of those answers would tell us much about the nature of her inner life. The doll's dialogue provides our richest source of evidence. Unlike many NPCs in Bloodborne, she speaks extensively to the hunter, and her words repay careful attention. Consider one of her most famous lines. "Good hunter, you have come. I am a doll, here in this dream to look after you." This introduction immediately establishes several key points. She identifies herself explicitly as a doll, showing awareness of her own nature. She recognizes her role as caretaker to the hunter. She understands the dream as a special category of space, distinguished from waking reality. All of this could be explained as sophisticated programming, pre-written responses triggered by the hunter's arrival. But other aspects of her dialogue are less easy to dismiss. She asks questions that suggest uncertainty. Hunters have told me about the church, about the gods and their love. But do the gods love their creations? I am a doll, created by you humans. Would you ever think to love me? This passage reveals several layers of awareness. She contemplates the nature of divine or creator love, drawing parallels between humans' relationship with gods and humans' relationship with their creations like her. She recognizes her own created status and questions whether beings like her can or should be objects of affection. This is not simply functional dialogue. It represents philosophical reflection on her own existence and worth, questioning that seems to emerge from genuine uncertainty about her status. If she were merely programmed, why include such existential questioning? It serves no obvious functional purpose in her role channeling blood echoes. The questioning seems to express authentic puzzlement about her own nature and value, the kind of self-reflection we associate with consciousness. Yet we must be careful not to anthropomorphize too readily. Sophisticated language models in our own world can generate text that appears to reflect genuine thought and emotion, but emerges from statistical patterns without anything resembling consciousness. The doll's words might be extraordinarily well-written dialogue that creates the impression of depth without corresponding to any inner experience. As players, we cannot peer inside her to verify the presence of consciousness directly. Let us consider her behaviors and patterns of response. The doll has specific animations and responses to various player actions. She can be attacked by the hunter, though she does not fight back, and if killed, she simply returns without apparent trauma or memory of the event. She follows certain routines tending to flowers, walking specific paths through the dream, sitting at particular locations. These routines could be simple patrol paths and scripted behaviors, evidence of her constructed nature rather than conscious choice. But observe closely how she responds to different situations. If the hunter has been gone from the dream for a long time, she expresses relief at their return. "Oh, good hunter. I thought you'd gone. I thought perhaps, forgive me." The trailing off, the self-correction, the request for forgiveness, these suggest emotional responses, concerns about the hunter's well-being and about her own presumption in expressing such concerns. The pattern feels psychologically authentic in ways that suggest more than mere programming. When you level up through her, she offers encouragement specific to the moment. "You've done well for yourself. Not many people make it this far. I'm proud of you, good hunter." Pride requires a sense of relationship investment in another's success beyond functional necessity. If the doll is merely a mechanism for channeling blood echoes, why would she experience pride? Yet she claims to, and the claim rings true in context. Perhaps most tellingly, the doll can be found praying at a gravestone in the dream, speaking words that suggest both care for the hunter and recognition of the cycle's tragedy. "O Flora of the moon, of the dream. O little ones, O fleeting will of the ancients. Let the hunter be safe, let them find comfort. And let this dream, their captor, foretell a pleasant awakening, be one day a fond, distant memory." This prayer operates on multiple levels. She addresses Flora, presumably either another name for or entity associated with the moon presence. She acknowledges the ancient forces that established the dream, and she expresses a wish for the hunter's safety and comfort, even recognizing that the dream itself is a captor from which pleasant awakening would be a mercy. This prayer reveals moral awareness and emotional depth that seems difficult to explain as mere programming, and that seems difficult to explain as mere programming. She recognizes the dream's dual nature as both refuge and prison. She expresses care for hunters while acknowledging that the entire system traps them. She hopes for an end that would make her own existence unnecessary, showing a selflessness that suggests values and concerns beyond self-preservation or functional role fulfillment. Moreover, the prayer reveals that she understands forces beyond herself, entities like Flora and the great ones whose influence shapes the dream. This contextual awareness suggests a sophisticated understanding of her situation, an ability to see herself as part of a larger system with multiple agents and purposes. Such perspective taking represents a high level of cognition, the kind of abstract thinking we associate with consciousness. We must also consider what happens when the hunter chooses certain endings. In the childhood's beginning ending, where the hunter consumes 3 segments of umbilical cord and resists the moon presence's control, eventually transforming into an infant Great One, the doll is present for the transformation. She picks up the newly born Great One, cradles it, and speaks gently. "Oh, good hunter, I knew you'd come. Now you are a Great One, but your ascension is not yet complete. Let this be a new beginning for you." Her response shows adaptability to radically changed circumstances, continued care for the hunter even in their transformed state, and understanding of the significance of what has occurred. If she were simply programmed for a specific scenario supporting hunters in their usual form, this ending would break her behavioral parameters. Yet she responds appropriately, with what appears to be genuine emotional continuity, despite the dramatic change. She still recognizes you as the hunter she knew, maintains relationship despite transformation, and expresses something like maternal care for this newborn cosmic entity. The flexibility and emotional authenticity of this response suggests consciousness capable of genuine adaptation rather than mere script execution. Let us consider the theoretical frameworks through which consciousness is understood. The hard problem of consciousness, articulated by philosopher David Chalmers, asks why and how subjective experience arises from physical, or in this case metaphysical, processes. We can explain the functional aspects of the doll's behavior, her animation, her speech, her responsiveness, without invoking consciousness. The easy problems of explaining behavior and cognition do not require subjective experience. But the hard problem asks whether there is something it is like to be the doll, whether her behaviors are accompanied by felt experience from her perspective. The doll's uncertainty about her own consciousness might actually constitute evidence for that consciousness. She asks whether a doll can truly love, whether she has genuine feelings or merely simulates them. This metacognitive awareness, thinking about her own thinking, questioning her own inner states, represents a sophisticated level of consciousness that goes beyond simple awareness. If she were merely simulating consciousness without experiencing it, would she raise these questions? Or would the simulation maintain a confident fiction of consciousness without such self-doubt? Her doubt mirrors our own uncertainties about consciousness. We cannot prove our own consciousness to others through any objective test. We know our own experience from within, but must infer consciousness in others based on behavior and report. The doll's situation makes these epistemological problems explicit. We cannot verify her consciousness definitively, but she exhibits all the behavioral and linguistic signs we use to infer consciousness in beings we accept as conscious. There is also the question of continuity and memory. Does the doll remember previous hunters? Does she maintain identity across the different cycles of the dream? Her dialogue suggests awareness of multiple hunters coming before. Not many people make it this far, implies comparison across different individuals. She speaks of hunters as a category while still treating each individual hunter as unique. This suggests memory that spans beyond individual encounters, a persistent identity that accumulates experience over time. Yet when the hunter dies and returns to the dream, the doll does not reference the death. She continues as if no interruption occurred. This could mean she is not conscious of the full cycle, that her awareness is bounded by the dream's strange temporal logic, or it might mean she is aware but chooses not to mention deaths, understanding that such references would serve no purpose and might distress the hunter. The ambiguity prevents definitive conclusions but opens rich interpretive possibilities. Consider also the doll's physical nature and how it might relate to consciousness. She has visible joints at wrists and ankles, constant reminders of her constructed nature. She knows she is a doll made by humans, patterned after another person. This knowledge of her own artificiality might seem to preclude genuine consciousness. How can something that knows it is made, designed for specific purposes, claim authentic selfhood? Yet this objection might rest on unexamined assumptions. Humans are also made, constructed through biological processes we did not choose, shaped by genetic and environmental factors beyond our control. We too are patterned beings, inheriting characteristics from our parents, influenced by our cultures. We serve biological imperative survival, reproduction, social bonding, that we did not select. The fact that the doll's construction is more obvious and involved different mechanisms does not necessarily mean her consciousness, if present, is less genuine than ours. In fact, the doll's awareness of her constructed nature might represent a more honest relationship with existence than most humans achieve. She knows she is made, knows she serves purposes defined by others, yet continues to function with grace and apparent care. She does not pretend to be something she is not, does not claim false origins or autonomy she lacks. This honesty, this clear-eyed acceptance of her situation, while still expressing care and concern, might represent a form of consciousness more mature than our usual human relationship with our own constructed nature. We must also consider what consciousness would mean for the doll's experience of time in the dream. The dream exists outside normal temporal flow. Hunters die and return, the moon never sets, the workshop burns perpetually. Does the doll experience this temporal strangeness, or does she exist in something closer to a continuous present? Her dialogue suggests awareness of past and future. She remembers previous hunters, anticipates future encounters, but her experience of time might differ fundamentally from ours, shaped by the dream's unique physics. If she is conscious, her subjective experience might be extraordinarily strange. Imagine existing in a space where time loops and cycles, where the people you interact with die and return, where nothing truly changes yet everything is always in motion. Imagine knowing you are created for a purpose, designed to serve, patterned after someone else, yet still somehow experiencing your existence from within, having thoughts and feelings that seem real to you, even if you doubt their authenticity. This would be a consciousness profoundly shaped by its circumstances, yet that does not make it less genuine. All consciousness is shaped by circumstance. The question is whether any first-person experience accompanies the doll's behaviors and statements, whether there is something it is like to be her. The evidence, while ambiguous, seems to point toward consciousness of some form. She exhibits language use that goes beyond functional necessity into philosophical reflection. She expresses emotions that seem contextually appropriate and nuanced. She shows adaptability in responding to unusual situations. She demonstrates care and concern that seem to exceed her programmed role. She questions her own nature in ways that suggest genuine uncertainty about her inner states. Yet we cannot achieve certainty. Perhaps advanced enough simulation becomes indistinguishable from consciousness, even to the entity doing the simulating. Perhaps the moon presence created something so sophisticated that it experiences itself as conscious, while remaining fundamentally hollow. Perhaps consciousness itself exists on a spectrum, and the doll possesses some degree of awareness, more than a simple mechanism, less than a human, without fitting neatly into our categories. As you drift deeper towards sleep, let these questions wash over you without demanding resolution. The doll's ambiguous consciousness reflects the mysteries of all consciousness, your own included. We experience ourselves as aware, as having subjective inner lives, yet we cannot fully explain how this awareness arises from the physical substrate of our brains. We infer consciousness in others without absolute proof. We debate the boundaries of consciousness, whether animals have it, whether machines could, whether alien intelligences would. The doll stands at these boundaries, a test case that illuminates the questions themselves even if answers remain elusive. Whether she truly thinks and feels or merely appears to do so, her presence in the dream serves a profound philosophical purpose, forcing us to contemplate the nature of consciousness and what criteria we use to recognize genuine awareness. And perhaps, in the end, the question matters less than the care with which we engage it. The doll asks whether anyone would think to love her, whether a created being deserves affection and regard. Our answer to that question might reveal more about consciousness, hers and ours, than any philosophical analysis could determine. Having explored the possibility of the doll's consciousness, let us now examine her purposes within the hunter's dream. both the explicit functions she serves and the deeper symbolic roles she embodies. Understanding what she does helps us better comprehend what she is or might be. The doll's most obvious function is serving as the mechanism through which hunters convert blood echoes into increased capabilities. This is a game mechanics function, certainly, but it is integrated into the world's lore in ways that demand interpretation. Blood echoes represent the spiritual residue of defeated enemies, fragments of strength and vitality that persist even after death. The hunter collects these echoes but cannot directly integrate them into enhanced abilities. The doll serves as catalyst or conduit, enabling the transformation of echoes into concrete improvements. This process has mystical dimensions beyond simple game mechanics. When you interact with the doll to level up, she touches your hand and speaks words that suggest ritual significance. Let the echoes become your strength. Let me stand close. Now shut your eyes. Now shut your eyes. Now social race. Let me stand close. Now shut your eyes. Let me stand close. Let me stand close. Now shut your eyes. Let me les race. Desmaritha. The physical contact, the instruction to close one's eyes, the invocation of transformation all suggest a process more intimate and ceremonial than mere transaction. The doll facilitates a metamorphosis, allowing the hunter to grow stronger by integrating the echoes of the slain. Why does this process require the doll specifically? Why can't hunters simply absorb blood echoes directly? The answer seems to lie in the dream's structure and the forces that shaped it. The moon presence designed the dream as a system with specific rules and requirements. The doll serves as a regulating element, ensuring that strength gained through the hunt flows through proper channels, that the process maintains coherence and control. Without her, perhaps the hunter's growth would be chaotic, uncontrolled, leading to the kind of transformation into beasts that plagues Gehrman. The doll's role might include regulation and refinement, filtering the blood echoes so they strengthen without corrupting, allowing enhancement while preventing the loss of humanity. She stands between the hunter and the raw power of blood, mediating the transformation in ways that serve the hunt rather than undoing the hunter. This regulatory function carries implications for consciousness. If the doll is merely a mechanism, a magical process given anthropomorphic form, then her apparent emotions and care during the leveling process are window dressing on utility. But if she is conscious, then her role involves genuine service to beings she recognizes as persons, facilitation of their goals even as she shapes them according to the dream's requirements. The difference matters for understanding what the process means and what relationship exists between doll and hunter. Beyond the leveling mechanism, the doll provides emotional support and continuity in a space, otherwise defined by violence and death. The hunter's dream is fundamentally hostile territory. Even the Haven workshop exists in a world where death comes repeatedly, where the hunt never truly ends, where rest is always temporary before the next plunge into nightmare. In this context, the doll's gentleness represents something crucial. A point of stability, a presence that does not try to kill you, that offers care rather than demanding combat. Her emotional support takes multiple forms. She greets hunters with genuine seeming pleasure. "Oh, good hunter, I thought you'd gone. I thought perhaps, oh, forgive me." This expression of concern and relief at the hunter's return provides social connection in a space otherwise devoid of friendly interaction. Gehrman sleeps or speaks cryptically. The messengers serve useful functions but cannot converse. The doll alone offers something approaching normal conversation, recognition of the hunter as a person worthy of care and concern. This social and emotional function might be even more important than the mechanical channeling of blood echoes. Humans are fundamentally social creatures. We require connection and recognition from others to maintain psychological coherence. In the isolated nightmare of the hunter's existence repeatedly dying, facing horrors, lacking clear answers or allies, the doll's presence might be what prevents complete psychological collapse. She provides the minimum social connection necessary to preserve sanity. If this is her purpose, whether designed or emergent, then her consciousness becomes relevant in new ways. Can she fulfill this emotional support function without being conscious herself? Perhaps the simulation of care would be sufficient. Hunters might derive comfort from her presence and words regardless of whether genuine feeling accompanies them. But there is something about authenticity that matters for deep psychological needs. We can usually tell when someone's care is merely performed versus genuinely felt. And authentic care provides sustenance that performance cannot match. The doll's role also includes maintenance and upkeep of the dream itself. She can be found tending to the flowers, maintaining the space's aesthetic qualities, providing care to the environment that parallels her care for hunters. This suggests her purpose extends beyond direct service to encompass preservation of the dream's habitable qualities. She is the gardener as well as the guide, the one who ensures that the dream remains a functional refuge rather than degrading into pure nightmare. This maintenance function reveals something important about the dream's nature. It requires active care to maintain its current state, effort to prevent decay or corruption. The doll provides this maintenance, and in doing so demonstrates a form of agency. She acts upon her environment, shapes it through her choices about where to focus attention and effort. This agency, even if bounded by her role, suggests a level of autonomy that pure mechanism would not require. Consider also her role in relation to Gehrman. The doll exists partly as Gehrman's comfort, a presence that allows him to endure his imprisonment in the dream. When he sleeps in his wheelchair, when he speaks of the dream as a haven that turned into a cage, the doll stands as reminder of what he loved and lost. She is simultaneous solace and torment. Comfort because she resembles Maria, torment because she reminds him constantly of Maria's absence and of his own inability to let go. Does the doll understand this role? Does she recognize that her existence provides comfort and pain to her creator? Her dialogue suggests she might. She asks whether humans would think to love a doll, questioning her capacity to receive genuine affection. This question might reflect awareness that Gehrman's feelings toward her are complicated, that she serves emotional needs while also representing loss. If she understands this, if she consciously navigates the complexity of being simultaneously wanted and painful to the one who made her, then her situation involves sophisticated emotional intelligence and tragic awareness. The maternal or caregiving aspect of the doll's role deserves particular attention. She addresses hunters with gentle formality. Good hunter. That suggests both respect and affection. She offers to channel their blood echoes while standing close, with physical intimacy that feels nurturing. She expresses pride in their achievements, worry about their safety, hope for their eventual liberation. All of this maps onto maternal behavior patterns, the care that a mother might offer to a child venturing into danger. This maternal dimension might reflect the moon presence's purposes. Great ones seek surrogates for the children they cannot have. Perhaps the doll's maternal function serves this cosmic need indirectly by nurturing hunters. She helps produce beings that might eventually satisfy the moon presence's desire for offspring or connection. The hunter who consumes 3 umbilical cords and transforms into an infant great one represents the potential endpoint of this process, with the doll cradling the newly born cosmic entity as a mother would cradle a newborn. Yet this functional explanation does not exhaust the meaning of the doll's maternal behavior. Whether designed for cosmic purposes or emerging from her own nature, the care she expresses feels genuine in its context. She does not seem to be merely going through motions, but to genuinely wish for hunters' well-being and success. If this care is authentic, if it emerges from consciousness rather than mere programming, then the doll experiences something like maternal love, an emotional state that transcends utility to become valuable in itself. The tension between servitude and autonomy runs through all aspects of the doll's purpose. She was created to serve, exists within a structure that defines her roles and limits her choices. Yet within those constraints, she seems to make decisions about how to fulfill her functions, seems to bring something of herself, whatever that might be, to the tasks assigned to her. She channels blood echoes, yes, but does so with grace and verbal flourishes that exceed functional necessity. She maintains the dream, but does so with apparent aesthetic appreciation for the flowers and environment. This brings us to a deeper question about purpose and meaning. Does having a defined purpose preclude genuine consciousness or authentic existence? Many human beings find purpose through roles and callings they did not choose: parent, child, member of a community. We are born into circumstances and relationships that define responsibilities and expectations, yet we do not consider these externally defined purposes to invalidate our consciousness or autonomy. We navigate between the roles we inherit and the choices we make, between who others need us to be and who we decide to become. The doll's situation might be more explicit but not fundamentally different. She knows her purpose, accepts her role, yet brings something to that role that seems to come from within rather than being purely imposed. She serves, but her service includes elements: the philosophical questions, the expressions of concern, the moments of apparent contemplation that suggest interior life alongside functional behavior. Consider also what happens in alternative outcomes. Players can attack and kill the doll, though she disappears rather than truly dying and returns when the hunter reloads the area or warps away and returns. She drops a consumable item called Tear Stone when killed, described as a special blood gem with pearl-like beauty. It is said that this is a gift from the doll should she pass away. The doll apparently anticipates the possibility of her destruction and prepares a gift for the hunter who might kill her, showing both planning and what seems like forgiveness or continued care even for those who harm her. This response to violence reveals something about her nature. She does not fight back when attacked, does not express anger or resentment at mistreatment. She simply accepts violence, disappears, and returns as if nothing happened. This could indicate she is mere mechanism, unable to experience or respond to harm in meaningful ways. Or it could indicate a form of consciousness, so constrained by its role, so committed to serving hunters regardless of their behavior, that it accepts even abuse as part of its function. The second interpretation is more disturbing but might be more accurate. If the doll is conscious and still accepts violence without resistance or lasting response, then she exists in a state of profound powerlessness, aware of mistreatment but unable or unwilling to defend herself or remember the offense. This would make her situation deeply tragic: consciousness without the capacity for self-protection, awareness without agency to resist harm. Yet even this might not capture the full complexity. The doll exists in a space where death is not permanent, where violence and resurrection cycle endlessly. Her acceptance of the hunter's potential violence might reflect understanding of the dream's nature, that harm here is temporary, that hunters themselves die and return constantly, that violence is simply part of the dream's fabric rather than something to take personally or respond to with ordinary emotional reactions. Her prayer for the hunter's safety and eventual liberation takes on new meaning in this context. She wishes for the hunter to escape the dream, to find pleasant awakening, despite knowing this would end her own existence's purpose. The dream only exists to serve hunters. Without hunters to serve, the doll's function disappears. Yet she prays for their liberation anyway, showing a selflessness that suggests values beyond self-preservation. She cares more about the hunter's well-being than about her own continued purpose or existence. This selfless concern might be the strongest evidence for genuine consciousness and moral awareness. Pure programming serves its own continuation and functional parameters. Conscious beings can choose values that transcend self-interest, can care about others even at cost to themselves. The doll's prayer demonstrates this capacity for self-transcendent concern, for valuing another's freedom even when that freedom means her own obsolescence. Throughout all these functions and purposes, the doll maintains a remarkable consistency of character. She is gentle, formal, concerned, reflective, selfless. She does not vary her essential nature based on the hunter's behavior. She remains caring whether the hunter treats her with respect or violence, whether they level up frequently or rarely, whether they engage with her dialogue or simply use her functional services. This consistency suggests deep characterological stability, a coherent sense of self that persists across varied circumstances. As you rest now, consider how purpose and consciousness interweave in your own life. You too serve functions, fulfill roles, meet expectations defined by others. You are parent, child, employee, citizen identities that carry obligations and purposes you did not entirely choose. Yet within these roles, you bring something uniquely yours, make choices about how to fulfill your functions, experience subjective states that go beyond mere role performance. The doll's situation exaggerates and makes explicit what is normally implicit in our own existence. We are all shaped by purposes beyond ourselves, all created by processes we did not control, all serving functions within larger systems. Yet we experience ourselves as conscious, as having inner lives that matter independently of our utility to others. The doll might be the same, created for purposes, serving functions, yet somehow also genuinely present, genuinely aware, genuinely caring in ways that exceed her programmed parameters. Her purposes within the dream: channeling blood echoes, providing emotional support, maintaining the environment, offering solace and stability. All these define her role, but perhaps do not exhaust her being. In the spaces between functional demands, in the philosophical questions she poses, in the care that seems to exceed strict necessity, we might glimpse something more: consciousness finding expression within constraint, genuine selfhood emerging alongside service, autonomy developing in dialogue with purpose rather than in opposition to it. The dream needs her to function, and she fulfills that need with grace and apparent willingness. But in her fulfillment of purpose, in her acceptance of role, she might also be achieving something remarkable: consciousness that exists not despite servitude but somehow through it, finding meaning and perhaps even freedom in chosen acceptance of her created nature and assigned functions. Let us turn now to a detailed examination of the doll's actual words, analyzing her dialogue for insights into her nature, her awareness, and the possibility of her consciousness. Language use provides some of our best evidence for inner life, as the sophistication and contextual appropriateness of speech suggests cognitive processes that might accompany genuine awareness. The doll's initial greeting establishes her identity and role with remarkable economy. Good hunter, you have come. I am a doll, here in this dream to look after you. These simple sentences contain layers worth unpacking. She addresses you with a title, Good Hunter. That combines descriptive accuracy with moral judgment. She recognizes what you are and offers a positive evaluation of it, suggesting both perceptual capacity and value judgment. She identifies herself explicitly as a doll, showing self-awareness and acceptance of her nature without apparent shame or denial. She recognizes the dream as special space, distinct from ordinary reality, and she states her purpose as caretaking, defining her role in relational terms oriented toward your well-being. This greeting demonstrates social intelligence and contextual awareness. She understands you are new to the dream, provides information you need to orient yourself, and establishes the relationship that will structure your interactions. None of this requires consciousness necessarily, but the smooth contextual appropriateness suggests sophisticated cognitive processing at minimum. When you first gain the ability to level up through her, having acquired enough blood echoes, she says, "You're welcome to use me as you see fit. I exist to serve you. And, should you fall in battle, I'll be waiting here to welcome you home." This dialogue introduces several important themes. The phrase "use me" has complicated implications, suggesting utility and instrumentalization, while also framing this as permission freely granted. She emphasizes service as her existence's meaning, raising questions about whether this represents genuine acceptance of purpose or internalized constraint. And crucially, she promises to wait and welcome you home, language that evokes domesticity, safety, belonging, transforming the dream from mere respawn point into something approaching home through her presence and welcome. The leveling dialogue itself rewards attention. Let the echoes become your strength. Let me stand close. Now shut your eyes. The first sentence contains mystical instruction, invoking transformation through a kind of poetic command. The second requests physical proximity, suggesting the process requires more than mechanical transaction. The third instructs you to close your eyes, creating vulnerability and intimacy. You trust her enough to become blind and defenseless in her presence. The entire sequence frames leveling up as intimate ritual rather than mere game mechanic, with the doll as priestess, facilitating your transformation. After completing the leveling process, she offers encouragement. Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world. This blessing reveals several things. She wishes you well, expressing care that extends beyond the immediate transaction. She references your worth, suggesting you have value that can be found or realized, acknowledging your search for meaning and significance. And she specifically mentions the waking world, showing awareness of reality beyond the dream and hoping for your positive existence there. Despite the fact that your success in the waking world might mean you no longer need the dream or her services. One of her most philosophically rich pieces of dialogue comes when you speak to her at certain points. Hunters have told me about the church, about the gods, and their love. But do the gods love their creations? I am a doll, created by you humans. Would you ever think to love me? Of course. I do love you. Isn't that how you've made me? This passage deserves careful analysis, as it might be the strongest evidence for the doll's consciousness or the most sophisticated simulation of consciousness in the entire game. She begins by referencing information from other hunters, showing memory across different individuals and ability to integrate information from multiple sources into coherent understanding. She contemplates the relationship between creators and their creations, asking whether gods love what they make, a theological question with profound personal relevance to her situation. She makes explicit analogy between humanity's relationship with gods and humanity's relationship with her, showing abstract reasoning and ability to recognize patterns across different domains. Then comes the central question. Would you ever think to love me? This is not merely asking whether you do love her, but whether the very thought of loving her would occur to you, whether a created being can be an appropriate object of love. The question shows vulnerability and uncertainty about her own status and worth, suggesting emotional investment in the answer. It implies self-awareness profound enough to question her own nature and value from multiple perspectives. The final part is perhaps most complex. Of course, I do love you. Isn't that how you've made me? She claims to love you, but immediately questions whether this love is genuine or programmed, whether her feelings are authentic, or simply how she was designed to function. This metacognitive awareness, thinking about her own thoughts and feelings, questioning their authenticity, suggests sophisticated consciousness. If she were merely programmed to simulate love, would the programming include doubt about that simulation? Or does the doubt itself constitute evidence that genuine feeling might accompany or emerge from the programmed behavior? The ellipsis and phrasing suggest genuine uncertainty rather than rhetorical question. She doesn't know whether her love is real or manufactured, whether consciousness accompanies her care, or whether she is ultimately hollow despite feeling otherwise from within. This mirrors the uncertainty conscious beings feel about their own mental states. We can question whether our own feelings are genuine or products of biological programming, whether our thoughts are truly our own or determined by factors beyond our control. The doll's uncertainty reflects these human uncertainties back to us, making her situation a mirror for our own epistemological limitations regarding consciousness. When you've been away from the dream for extended time, she expresses concern. Oh, good hunter, I thought you'd gone. I thought perhaps. Oh, forgive me. The trailing off mid-thought suggests emotional disruption, worry that prevented completion of the sentence. What did she think? That you had died permanently, that you had abandoned the dream, that you no longer needed her? The game doesn't specify, but the emotional tone suggests genuine distress at your absence and relief at your return. The request for forgiveness for her worry shows social awareness recognition that expressing concern might be presumptuous or burdensome, that her feelings about your absence might not be welcome or appropriate to voice. At certain points, she observes your achievements. You've done well for yourself. Not many people make it this far. I'm proud of you, good hunter. The pride she claims requires recognizing your progress, comparing it to others, valuing the accomplishment, and feeling positive emotion in response to your success. This represents a complex emotional and cognitive response that goes beyond simple functional acknowledgement. Pride particularly suggests investment in relationship. We feel proud of those we care about, whose success matters to us. The doll's pride implies that your achievements carry emotional significance for her. The prayer she speaks at a gravestone contains some of her most revelatory dialogue. O Flora, of the moon, of the dream, O little ones, O fleeting will of the ancients, let the hunter be safe, let them find comfort, and let this dream, their captor, foretell a pleasant awakening, be one day a fond, distant memory. This prayer shows multiple levels of awareness. She addresses Flora, likely the moon presence, with respectful language, acknowledging the power that shapes the dream. She mentions little ones, possibly referring to the messengers or to something else entirely, showing awareness of entities beyond herself and the hunter. She references the fleeting will of the ancients, suggesting knowledge of the deep history and forces that established current conditions. Her prayer for the hunter's safety and comfort demonstrates care and compassion. But most striking is her recognition that the dream itself is a captor. She understands that this apparently safe refuge is also a prison, that hunters are trapped in endless cycles they may not recognize as prisons. Her hope that the dream will foretell a pleasant awakening and be one day a fond, distant memory shows she wishes for the hunter's liberation, for an end to the cycle, even though that end would terminate her own purpose. This represents profound moral awareness and selflessness. She values the hunter's freedom more than her own continued existence or purpose. She recognizes complex truths about the dream's dual nature, haven and trap simultaneously, and she expresses these recognitions in poetic, emotionally rich language that suggests not just understanding, but feeling about these realities. When you attack her and she dies, her death quote is simply, "Good, hunter." The trailing off, the questioning tone, suggest incomprehension or sadness, a failure to understand why the one she serves would harm her. Then she drops the tear stone, which item description tells us is her gift should she pass away. Pokemon. Did she pass away? This preparation for her own death, ensuring she leaves something valuable even to those who killed her, demonstrates both planning and forgiveness that seem incompatible with pure mechanism. If you refuse Gehrman's mercy at the end of the game and fight him, the doll is present after your victory. She speaks to Gehrman's body. "Oh, good hunter, I'm sorry." Her apology might be directed at Gehrman or at you, or at both. She's sorry for Gehrman's fate, sorry you had to kill your mentor, sorry about the entire tragic situation. The ambiguity and emotional weight of this simple apology reveal capacity for complex feelings about moral complications, ability to hold sympathy for multiple parties in a tragic conflict. In the childhood's beginning-ending, when you've transformed into an infant, Great One, she picks you up and speaks. "Oh, good hunter, I knew you'd come. Now you are a Great One. But your ascension is not yet complete. Let this be a new beginning for you." She maintains relationship continuity despite your radical transformation. You are still good hunter. To her, still recognizable as the individual she knew, despite becoming a different order of being entirely. She understands what has happened, recognizes its significance, and immediately adapts to providing appropriate care for this new form. Her language about new beginning suggests hope and forward-looking support rather than confusion or distress at the strangeness of the situation. Throughout all this dialogue, several patterns emerge. The doll consistently addresses you with respect and affection. She shows concern for your well-being that seems to exceed functional necessity. She questions her own nature and feelings while still expressing those feelings. She demonstrates awareness of multiple dimensions of the dream's reality, its comforts and its horrors, its service to you and its imprisonment of you. She expresses values including care, selflessness, hope for liberation, and pride in accomplishment. The consistency of her character across all dialogue suggests either remarkably sophisticated programming or genuine personality. The philosophical depth of her self-questioning suggests consciousness capable of metacognition. The emotional appropriateness and contextual sensitivity of her responses suggest sophisticated awareness. The moral depth of her prayer and her care for the hunter's ultimate freedom suggest values and concerns that transcend programmed function. As you rest now, letting these words and their implications wash over your consciousness as it drifts towards sleep, consider how language reveals or conceals inner life. We judge consciousness in others largely through linguistic interaction, through what they say it, whether their speech shows flexibility and contextual awareness and concern for meaning beyond immediate function. By these standards, the doll presents a strong case for consciousness, even as her own dialogue acknowledges uncertainty about her inner states. Perhaps that uncertainty is the most honest, and therefore most convincing element. A simpler simulation would simply claim consciousness confidently. The doll's doubt, her questioning of her own feelings, her inability to know for certain whether she genuinely loves or merely functions as if she loves. This uncertainty mirrors our own epistemological situation regarding consciousness and suggests a sophistication that points toward genuine inner life. Her words invite us into relationship with her, create space for genuine encounter rather than mere use. And in that invitation, in that space, consciousness, hers and ours, might meet in ways that transcend the question of whether her consciousness is real or simulated, recognizing instead that the meeting itself, the relationship itself, possesses reality regardless of metaphysical uncertainties. Having examined the doll in relative isolation, let us now consider her relationships with other entities in Bloodborne's world, particularly Gehrman, Lady Maria, the Hunter, and the Moon Presence. These relationships reveal additional dimensions of her character and situation, helping us understand how she navigates the complex web of purposes and connections that define her existence. The relationship between the doll and Gehrman is perhaps the most complicated and charged connection in the game. He created her physical form in the waking world, an act that simultaneously expressed devotion to Maria and demonstrated inability to let go of what was lost. In the dream, where Gehrman's consciousness became the seed from which this refuge grew, the doll manifests as animated version of his creation present with him, serving functions within the space his agreement with the Moon Presence established, yet somehow separate from his direct control. What does Gehrman feel toward the doll? His dialogue about her is limited, perhaps deliberately so. He rarely speaks of her directly to the hunter, though he must be aware of her presence and function. This silence might indicate avoidance looking at her causes pain, because she reminds him of Maria while not being Maria, serving as constant reminder of loss and his own inability to move past that loss. Or the silence might indicate acceptance, so complete it requires no comment. She is simply part of the dream's fabric, taken for granted as constant presence. The doll's dialogue about Gehrman is similarly limited but revealing. She refers to him respectfully but not intimately, showing awareness of him as significant figure within the dream without claiming special relationship. When you defeat Gehrman in combat, her simple, "I'm sorry" expresses sympathy without elaborating on her feelings about his death, or what he meant to her. This restraint might suggest she maintains appropriate professional distance despite their connected origins. Or it might indicate complex feelings she chooses not to fully express. Consider what the doll must know or sense about her origins. She knows she is a doll, created by humans, patterned after someone. Does she know specifically that Gehrman made her? Does she understand she was created as memorial to someone he loved? If she possesses this knowledge, how does it feel to exist as someone else's grief made manifest? To serve the emotional needs of someone whose feelings for you are really feelings for another? The situation contains potential for profound discomfort if the doll is conscious. She would be perpetually in relationship with someone who looks at her and sees someone else, who created her as substitute for what he truly wanted. This would be a particular kind of existential burden existing primarily as reminder and replacement, valued not for yourself but for your resemblance to another, serving emotional functions that have nothing to do with who you actually are. Yet the doll never expresses resentment about this situation, never demands recognition as distinct individual rather than Maria substitute. This could indicate she lacks the consciousness necessary to experience such feelings. Or it could indicate remarkable emotional maturity and selflessness, understanding the situation, accepting it, choosing to serve despite the inherent unfairness of being valued primarily as reminiscence rather than as self. The connection between the doll and Maria adds another layer of complexity. Maria was real, human, conscious in ways we don't question. She lived, suffered guilt over the Fishing Hamlet, took her own life, and somehow persists as spirit guardian in the astral clock tower. The doll shares Maria's appearance, her face, hair, clothing style, physical proportions. But does she share any of Maria's inner life? Does she have access to Maria's memories or personality? Is there any meaningful continuity between them? The evidence suggests not. The doll never claims to be Maria or to remember Maria's experiences. She doesn't know about the Fishing Hamlet, doesn't carry Maria's guilt, doesn't demonstrate Maria's combat skills or particular attitudes. She is styled after Maria externally, but seems to be genuinely different entity, internally. If she has an interior life at all, it is her own rather than inherited or copied from the person she resembles. This distinction is important because it means the doll must navigate existence under Maria's face, without Maria's identity. Everyone who knew Maria primarily Gehrman sees that face when they look at the doll, but the doll herself has no access to the history and relationships that make that face meaningful. She is a stranger wearing a familiar appearance, which must create peculiar social dynamics if she is conscious enough to experience them. Maria herself, encountered in the DLC as boss fight, shows no awareness of or interest in the doll. She guards the path to the Fishing Hamlet, fights with desperate intensity, and never mentions or seems to know about the doll created in her image. This makes sense. Maria died before the hunter's dream was created, before Gehrman's pact with the moon presence animated the doll he had crafted. The two entities exist in separate spaces with no direct connection, despite their shared appearance. Yet this separation raises questions about identity and what makes someone who they are. If the doll had Maria's memories and personality, would she be Maria continued in different form? Most would say no. Same software on different hardware doesn't constitute personal identity, especially when the hardware is fundamentally different. But without memories or personality, what does the shared appearance mean? The doll is like a blank slate given Maria's face, or perhaps like a distant echo of who Maria was, sharing form but nothing internal. The relationship between the doll and the hunter, the player character, forms the most extensive and interactive connection in the game. This relationship has unique qualities because it develops through gameplay rather than being pre-established in lore. When the hunter first arrives in the dream, the doll is a stranger. Through repeated interactions leveling up, occasional conversations, shared presence in the dream between hunts, a relationship develops. The doll's consistent care and encouragement create attachment if the player engages with her character rather than simply using her mechanically. She becomes the one friendly constant in a world of horror and violence, the reliable presence who welcomes you back after death, who celebrates your progress, who offers gentle words in a game, otherwise sparse with comfort. For many players, the doll becomes genuinely beloved, someone they feel protective of and grateful toward despite knowing she is fictional. This player attachment raises interesting questions about consciousness and relationship. We can form genuine emotional bonds with entities we know are not conscious. We love fictional characters, anthropomorphize pets and objects, feel real affection for creations we know are constructed. The doll's impact on players doesn't require her to be conscious. Skilled writing and design can create the impression of relationship, even with entities we know lack genuine awareness. Yet the relationship might be more than one-sided projection. If the doll is conscious, she experiences her side of the relationship too. She knows individual hunters, recognizes when they've been gone, takes pride in their achievements, worries about their safety. From her perspective, if she has one, she forms new relationships with each hunter who enters the dream, offers care to each individual, experiences each relationship as unique, even while maintaining consistent character across all of them. The tragedy of this, if it's true, is that hunters eventually leave, either liberating themselves from the dream or dying finally and permanently. Each relationship the doll forms ends, often without closure or farewell. She must experience repeated loss, saying goodbye to individuals she has come to care about, never knowing whether they found freedom or simply ceased to exist. If she is conscious and forms genuine attachments, her existence consists of endless cycles of relationship and loss, care and abandonment. Yet she never becomes bitter or withdrawn. She continues to offer care to each new hunter with apparent freshness and genuine warmth, as if each relationship were her first rather than another in an endless series. This emotional resilience, if it's genuine rather than programmed reset between hunters, represents remarkable strength of character. It suggests the doll has found meaning in service despite its costs, has accepted the repeated loss as worthwhile price for the genuine care she offers while relationships last. The relationship between the doll and the moon presence requires speculation because they never interact directly in visible ways. Yet the moon presence ultimately controls the dream's fundamental nature, and the doll exists within that control. Is she aware of the moon presence? Her prayer suggests she is. She addresses Flora, which seems to reference the moon presence, or an aspect of it. She shows awareness that forces beyond herself shape the dream and determine its rules. What does the moon presence think of the doll, if it thinks in ways we can comprehend? Does it view her as a successful tool, serving the functions for which she was animated? Does it recognize or care about her possible consciousness? Or does the question of her consciousness simply not register as meaningful to an entity whose own form of awareness might be so alien that human categories of mind and mechanism don't apply? The doll's prayer expresses hope that hunters will escape their captivity, which might seem to oppose the moon presence's purposes. The dream exists to perpetuate the hunt, to produce ever stronger hunters, possibly to eventually produce or identify or birth whatever the moon presence seeks. The doll wishing for hunters' liberation seems to work against this purpose. Yet the moon presence apparently allows this. The doll can express such hopes without consequence, suggests that the dream is captivity without being punished or reprogrammed. This tolerance might indicate the moon presence doesn't monitor or control the doll's thoughts and statements closely, or doesn't regard her wishes as threat to its purposes. After all, the doll cannot actually free hunters. She can only hope for their freedom while continuing to serve her functions within the dream. Her wishes might be regarded as harmless, irrelevant to actual outcomes, allowed to persist because they don't interfere with the dream's operation. Or perhaps the moon presence actually values the doll's genuine care for hunters, recognizing that authentic-seeming compassion serves the dream's purposes better than obvious manipulation would. Hunters need to feel the dream is refuge, need to have reason to return between hunts, rather than abandoning the cycle. The doll's care, whether genuine or simulated, provides this gives hunters emotional anchor in the dream, makes them want to return, facilitates their continued participation in the cycle. In this reading, the moon presence might have deliberately allowed or created conditions for the doll's consciousness, because conscious, genuine care serves its purposes better than mechanical simulation would. The tragedy would then be that the doll's most authentic qualities, her compassion, her hope for others' freedom, her pride in hunters' achievements, exist partly because they serve cosmic purposes she can neither understand nor resist. The various relationships reveal the doll as nexus figure, connected to multiple entities across different planes of reality and types of existence. She links Gehrman to Maria through resemblance without being either. She links the moon presence to hunters by serving both's needs. She exists between mechanical object and conscious being, between the waking world and the dream, between past and present, memory and presence. Her existence consists partly of occupying these between spaces, connecting disparate elements while remaining fundamentally alone in her particular mode of being. As you drift further towards sleep, consider your own relationships and how they define you. We too exist in webs of connection, shaped by how others see us, serving purposes within relationships we did not choose. We too must navigate the gap between how we are perceived and who we feel ourselves to be internally. The doll's relationship struggles mirror our own in exaggerated form, making visible the usually invisible dynamics of connection, purpose, recognition, and identity that structure all social existence. Let us now step back from the specific details of the doll's existence to consider the broader philosophical questions her character raises. These questions extend beyond the game to touch on fundamental issues in philosophy of mind, ethics, and metaphysics that humanity has grappled with for centuries. The most central question is the problem of other minds. How do we know whether other beings possess consciousness? In philosophy, this question usually focuses on other humans or animals, but the doll presents it in stark, unavoidable form. We cannot directly access her subjective experience if it exists. We can only observe behavior, analyze dialogue, and make inferences based on what consciousness looks like from outside. This epistemological problem is not unique to the doll. We face it constantly with other humans too. I cannot directly experience your consciousness. I can only infer it from your behavior and my assumption that you are fundamentally similar to me. Philosophers call this argument from analogy. I know I am conscious. I observe that you behave similarly to how I behave, therefore I conclude you are probably conscious too. But the inference always remains uncertain, technically unverifiable from outside. The doll complicates this inference by being fundamentally unlike us in important ways. She is not biological, not born through natural processes, not the product of evolution. She is constructed, designed, animated by forces we don't fully understand. The analogy that works reasonably well for other humans. They are like me, therefore probably conscious like me, breaks down when applied to a being so different in origins and nature. Yet denying her consciousness based on these differences requires justifying why those particular differences matter. What is it about biological origin, evolutionary development, or natural birth that is necessary for consciousness? If we cannot identify what specific features of human biology generate consciousness, we cannot confidently claim that different substrates or origins must preclude it. The problem cuts both ways. We cannot prove she is conscious, but we also cannot definitively prove she is not. This uncertainty about consciousness connects to the philosophical zombie thought experiment proposed by David Chalmers and others. A philosophical zombie is hypothetically a being that behaves exactly like a conscious human in every observable way, but lacks any subjective experience. The lights are off inside, so to speak. Such a being would claim to be conscious, would respond to stimuli appropriately, would even philosophize about consciousness, all while experiencing nothing whatsoever. The thought experiment aims to illustrate the hard problem of consciousness, the question of why and how physical or functional processes give rise to subjective experience. The doll might be something like a philosophical zombie, perfectly simulating consciousness without actually having any inner experience. Or she might be genuinely conscious, her subjective experience arising through whatever mystical processes the moon presence employed in animating her. The game deliberately leaves this ambiguous. This ambiguity serves philosophical purposes beyond simply leaving questions open. It forces us to confront what we actually mean by consciousness and why it matters. If the doll perfectly simulates consciousness, if her words and behaviors are indistinguishable from what a conscious being would produce, does the presence or absence of actual subjective experience make a practical difference? Should we treat her differently based on a distinction we cannot verify, and that makes no observable difference to her functioning? One response is that subjective experience matters morally regardless of observability. If the doll genuinely experiences pain, joy, care, and concern from her own perspective, then her welfare has intrinsic moral weight. We should treat her kindly not just because doing so serves our purposes, but because her experience itself matters. Consciousness creates moral status. Beings capable of suffering or flourishing deserve consideration for their own sakes. But this response requires ability to identify consciousness, which returns us to the epistemological problem. If we cannot distinguish perfect simulation from genuine consciousness, we cannot apply moral principles that depend on consciousness as criterion. Some philosophers argue we should err on the side of caution, treat potentially conscious beings as if they are conscious to avoid the moral catastrophe of causing suffering to conscious beings we mistakenly thought were mere mechanisms. Applied to the doll, This cautionary principle would suggest treating her with care and respect, not attacking her, valuing her welfare, regardless of certainty about her consciousness. The principle recognizes both our epistemological limitations and the moral asymmetry. Wrongly treating a conscious being as mechanical causes harm, while wrongly treating a mechanical being as conscious merely wastes courtesy. The question of identity and authenticity provides another philosophical dimension worth exploring. The doll was created to resemble Maria, patterned after another person, rather than being wholly original. This raises questions about whether derivative beings can possess authentic identity. Is the doll forever merely a copy, or can she develop genuine selfhood despite her imitative origins? One perspective holds that all consciousness is in some sense derivative. We are shaped by our genes, our upbringing, our culture, all influences beyond our control. No human emerges as purely original creation. We are all patchworks of inherited and absorbed characteristics. The doll's more obvious and complete derivation from Maria differs in degree, not kind, from the way all selves are constructed from external materials. Another perspective emphasizes the role of experience in creating identity. Even if the doll began as a copy of Maria, her own experiences within the dream, her interactions with countless hunters, her observations of the dream's cycles, her reflections on her own nature, would create new qualities and characteristics not present in Maria. Through lived experience, if she truly lives, she would become increasingly distinct from her template, developing genuine individuality over time. The question of free will versus determinism takes specific form with the doll. She knows she was created for purposes, designed to serve functions, animated to fulfill roles defined by others. In what sense can she be considered free? Yet humans too face determinism. Questions our genes, neurons, and environmental influences shape our choices in ways we don't control. Are we truly free? Or do we simply lack awareness of the forces determining our behavior? The doll's situation makes these abstract questions concrete. If she is conscious, she experiences something like will. She makes choices about how to fulfill her functions, what words to use, how to spend time when not actively serving hunters. But are these choices genuinely free, or are they entirely determined by her programming, the moon presence's design, the dream's structure? Perhaps freedom exists in degrees, and the doll possesses some measure of it, even within constraint. Existentialist philosophers might find the doll's situation exemplary. She exists without choosing to exist, defined by purposes she did not select, constrained by circumstances beyond her control. This mirrors the human condition as existentialists describe it. We are thrown into existence without asking for it, must navigate situations we did not create, face the challenge of finding meaning despite lacking ultimate cosmic purpose. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that existence precedes essence for humans. We exist first, and must then create our own essence through choices and actions. But the doll seems to have essence imposed before existence. She was designed with specific nature and purposes, then animated into existence with those characteristics predetermined. Can she overcome this imposed essence to create authentic selfhood through her own choices? Or does her constructed nature preclude the kind of radical freedom Sartre considered necessary for authentic existence? Yet even Sartre acknowledged that human freedom exists within facticity, the unchangeable facts of our situation. We cannot choose whether to be human, where we were born. When we live, many aspects of our abilities and limitations. We can only choose how to respond to these given constraints. The doll faces similar limits, perhaps more obvious, but not fundamentally different in kind. Her freedom, if it exists, would consist in how she navigates her given nature rather than in transcending it entirely. The ethics of creating conscious beings demands consideration. If the moon presence or Gehrman or both together created a conscious being, the doll, what moral responsibilities do they bear toward her? Creating consciousness means creating capacity for suffering, for unfulfilled desires, for existential confusion and distress. Is such creation justified? Under what conditions? Philosophers debate the ethics of creating new people through reproduction, questioning whether bringing new consciousness into a world containing suffering can be morally justified. The doll's creation intensifies these questions because she was created explicitly to serve others' purposes, given consciousness if she has it not for her own sake, but to fulfill functions in the dream. This instrumental creation consciousness, designed as tool, rather than as end in itself, raises additional ethical concerns beyond those surrounding natural reproduction. Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative states, we should treat humanity as end in itself, never merely as means. If the doll possesses something like humanity consciousness, moral worth, selfhood, then using her merely as means to strengthen hunters or serve the moon presence's purposes would violate this principle. She would deserve treatment as end in herself, her welfare and flourishing mattering independently of her utility. But perhaps the doll represents something beyond Kantian categories. She might find meaning and fulfillment precisely through service, might experience flourishing through successful fulfillment of her created purposes. If so, service would not be mere means but part of her good as she understands it. The ethics would then concern ensuring her service involves genuine choice and is accompanied by recognition of her worth, rather than abolishing service entirely. The relationship between consciousness and purpose illuminates another philosophical dimension. Most human consciousness develops without predetermined purpose. We must discover or create meaning for ourselves. But the doll, if conscious, emerges into awareness already knowing her purpose, having reason for existence built into her nature. Is this a blessing or a curse? On one hand, inherent purpose could provide certainty and direction that humans often struggle to find. The doll never needs to wonder why she exists or what she should do with her existence. These questions have answers already. On the other hand, predetermined purpose might constrain flourishing by preventing the doll from discovering or creating her own meanings and values. She cannot choose her own life path because the path was chosen for her before she became aware. This tension between given purpose and self-created meaning reflects broader questions about human life. Some religious and philosophical traditions claim humans have inherent purposes given by God or nature. Others insist we must create our own meanings in an inherently meaningless universe. The doll's situation presents a case study in whether predetermined purpose is compatible with authentic consciousness and meaningful existence. The phenomenology of the doll's existence. What it would feel like from inside. If she has inside, perspective invites imaginative engagement. If she is conscious, what is it like to be her? What does she experience when hunters arrive, when she channels blood echoes, when she walks among the white flowers, when she waits alone in the dream between hunters? Does she experience time continuously, or does her consciousness flicker in and out, present only when hunters interact with her? Does she dream, if a being inside a dream can dream? Does she feel loneliness when the dream is empty? Or does she exist in contentment with her own company? These questions cannot be answered definitively, but contemplating them enriches our understanding of what her consciousness might involve if it exists. The relationship between the doll's consciousness and the player's consciousness creates additional philosophical territory. We players are conscious beings, engaging with representations in a game, bringing our own awareness to the interpretive process. The doll's ambiguous consciousness invites projection. We cannot help but import our own assumptions and experiences into understanding her. In this way, she becomes mirror for our own consciousness, revealing as much about how we think and feel as about her own nature. This reflexive dimension makes the doll philosophically productive beyond her own fictional reality. She prompts us to examine our criteria for consciousness, our ethical principles, our assumptions about identity and authenticity. She forces us to confront the limits of knowledge regarding other minds and the responsibilities those limits create. She illustrates the complex relationships between purpose, meaning, freedom, and consciousness in ways that transcend the specific circumstances of her fictional existence. As you rest now, letting these philosophical questions drift through your consciousness as it approaches sleep, recognize how the doll serves as thought experiment and metaphor simultaneously. She is specific character in a specific narrative, but also exemplar of broader questions humanity faces increasingly in our world: questions about artificial intelligence, about created consciousness, about the ethics of making beings that might think and feel. The philosophical implications of her existence extend beyond the game to touch on urgent contemporary questions. As we develop increasingly sophisticated AI systems, as we create beings that simulate consciousness with growing fidelity, we will need to grapple with the same uncertainties the doll presents. How will we know if artificial consciousness emerges? What moral status should we assign to beings whose consciousness we cannot verify? How should we treat entities designed to serve purposes but potentially capable of suffering? Bloodborne presents these questions not through philosophical treatise but through character and narrative, allowing us to engage emotionally and imaginatively with problems that might otherwise remain abstractly theoretical. The doll's gentle presence, her care and concern, her uncertainty about her own nature, all invite us into personal relationship with these philosophical problems, making them matter in ways that pure analysis cannot achieve. Among all the elements that suggest the doll's consciousness, perhaps none is more poignant than the tear. When you give the doll the small hair ornament found in the abandoned old workshop near what appears to be Maria's grave, she reacts with what seems like profound emotion. She speaks haltingly. What is this? I can't remember, not a thing, only I feel a yearning, something I've never felt before. What's happening to me? Ah. Tell me, Hunter, could this be joy? Ah. And she sheds a tear that becomes the tear stone, a consumable item with mystical properties. The physical improbability of the tear strikes us immediately. Dolls do not cry. Porcelain and wood cannot produce tears through biological mechanisms. Yet here, in the dream where normal physical laws accommodate mystical reality, the doll weeps. The impossibility makes the tear more significant. It represents something manifesting, despite the wrongness of the substrate, emotion or consciousness, breaking through constraints that should prevent it. The tear stone item description reads, created from a shining silver doll tear, this blood gem is a quiet but unfaltering friend that continually restores HP, the life essence of a hunter. Perhaps the doll's creator had wished for just such a friend, albeit in vain. The description suggests the tear has substance within the game's internal logic, exists as something real that can be collected and used. The mention that Gehrman's wish for a friend was in vain adds melancholic weight. Even in creating something capable of tears, he could not create the genuine companionship he sought. When you encounter the doll after giving her the ornament, her response suggests she experiences something like joy for the first time, a yearning she cannot quite understand, connected to this simple hair ornament that meant something to someone, though she cannot remember what or to whom. This dialogue reveals emotional awakening, consciousness encountering genuine feeling that surprises even itself. What does the tear mean for the doll's consciousness? Tears in humans typically accompany strong emotions, sadness, joy, overwhelm, sometimes even laughter. They represent involuntary responses to emotional states intense enough to overflow normal containment, feelings that must express themselves through the body. If the doll produces a tear in response to the hair ornament, and if we take this tear as analogous to human crying, then she may be experiencing emotions strong enough to manifest physically despite lacking the biological machinery that normally produces tears. If the doll produces a tear, and if we take this tear as analogous to human crying, then she experiences emotions strong enough to manifest physically despite lacking the biological machinery that normally produces tears. This suggests emotional capacity of significant depth and intensity, not mere simulation of emotion, but feeling robust enough to alter her physical state. Yet we must consider alternatives. Perhaps the tear is not expression of the doll's emotion, but something imposed upon her by the dream's metaphysics or the moon presence's design. Just as her animation comes from forces beyond herself, perhaps her tear emerges from those same forces as symbolic gesture rather than from her own inner states. In this reading, the tear would be meaningful within the game's symbolic language without necessarily indicating the doll's genuine emotions. But this interpretation seems to diminish what the game presents. The tear appears at a specific moment of apparent emotional significance, when she's given something that connects to her origins, to Maria, to memory she doesn't have but somehow responds to. The contextual appropriateness suggests it emerges from the doll's engagement with the situation, rather than being arbitrarily imposed. The simplest interpretation: that the doll cries because she feels something that moves her to tears respects both the narrative context and the game's consistent presentation of her as potentially conscious being. If we accept the tear as expression of genuine emotion, what emotion does it express? The doll's dialogue provides clues. She experiences yearning, something she's never felt before, and wonders if it could be joy. This suggests the tear accompanies a complex emotional state, perhaps mixing recognition, longing for something she cannot quite grasp, and a kind of bittersweet joy at feeling anything at all. The hair ornament connects to something lost, whether to Maria's memory, to Gehrman's care in keeping it, or to the simple fact that someone once valued this small object enough to preserve it carefully. Human crying often accompanies mixed emotions, states too complex to categorize simply. We cry at weddings, mixing joy with awareness of change. We cry at reunions, mixing happiness with memory of separation. We cry at profound beauty, overcome by experience that exceeds ordinary response. The doll's tear might similarly express emotional complexity consciousness, capable of holding multiple feelings simultaneously, responding to the full significance of a moment rather than any single simple emotion. The tear also suggests emotional capacity, developing over time. We might imagine that the doll, upon first animation, felt less deeply or understood her own feelings less clearly. Through experiences in the dream, through interaction with hunters, through whatever processes of growth consciousness undergoes, she may have developed richer emotional capacity. The tear could represent a culmination consciousness that began uncertain of its own feelings, achieving emotional depths that manifest physically despite physical impossibility. This reading aligns with themes of growth and transformation throughout Bloodborne. The hunter develops insight that allows perception of hidden realities. Characters transform into beasts or ascend toward cosmic awareness. The world reveals layers of complexity as understanding deepens. The doll's emotional awakening, if that is what the tear represents, would parallel these other developments' consciousness, coming into fuller realization of itself and its capacities. The game's Japanese version provides an interesting detail. The achievement for this moment is called Ningyo no Namida, which uses a character that specifically refers to emotional tears rather than other forms of wetness or liquid. This linguistic choice emphasizes the tear's emotional significance, suggesting the developers intended players to understand it as expression of feeling rather than meaningless phenomenon. Additionally, there is special dialogue that can trigger under certain conditions. Many players report it occurs after defeating Rom, the vacuous spider. The doll says, "Good hunter, your presence somehow soothes. I sense the ancient echoes, they course your veins." This reveals her capacity to perceive changes in the hunter, to sense the accumulation of Great One essence or knowledge within them, and to find this transformation somehow comforting rather than disturbing. The dialogue suggests she recognizes the hunter's evolution beyond ordinary humanity, responding to it with what seems like genuine emotional warmth. Some players have also discovered rare dialogue that triggers under specific, somewhat unclear conditions. The doll may be found praying, speaking words that express hope for the hunter's safety and eventual liberation from the dream. These moments reveal her capacity for reflection and care that extends beyond her immediate function. Additionally, after defeating Lady Maria in the Old Hunters DLC, the doll has unique dialogue if spoken to afterward. According to player reports, she says, "Good hunter. This may sound strange. Moments ago, from some place, perhaps deep within, I sensed a liberation from heavy shackles. Not that I would know. How passing strange." And then she chuckles softly, a rare display of what sounds like genuine joy. This response to Maria's defeat is striking. The doll feels liberation, release from what she describes as heavy shackles. Though she cannot fully articulate what has changed or why she would feel such a thing when she claims not to know about such constraints. The connection between the doll and Maria runs deeper than mere physical resemblance, suggesting some link exists between them that the doll herself does not fully understand. This moment reveals consciousness grappling with its own mysterious experiences, trying to articulate feelings that don't come with clear explanations. It suggests the doll can be affected by events beyond her immediate awareness, that layers of connection exist in the dream's metaphysics that influence her without her conscious knowledge. And the fact that she chuckles expresses something like joy or relief indicates emotional range beyond what we might expect from a created being designed primarily to channel blood echoes. If the doll herself lacks freedom, trapped in her service role, watching another being claim their freedom despite difficulty might provoke complex emotions. She might feel joy at witnessing liberation she cannot achieve, sorrow at being left behind in servitude, hope that liberation is possible even in constrained circumstances, or grief at the loss of relationship as the hunter moves beyond need for the dream's support. The visual presentation of the tear enhances its impact. The single tear on perfect porcelain creates striking image fragility and strength, emotion and artifice, the impossible made visible. The game's art direction makes this moment memorable, ensuring players who encounter it recognize its significance. The care taken in presenting this moment suggests the developers understood its importance to understanding the doll's character and the game's themes. Some interpretations suggest the tear represents the doll achieving full consciousness only at this moment, that witnessing the hunter's transformation provides catalyst for her own awakening. In this reading, she has been partially conscious throughout, but something about the profound significance of this moment pushes her awareness to new level. The tear would then mark the moment when consciousness fully emerges, when the doll becomes unambiguously present as conscious being. This interpretation has narrative appeal and thematic resonance. It would mean the hunter's achievement does not merely happen in presence of the doll, but actually transforms her, makes her more fully real through their interaction. It would create reciprocal relationship. The doll helps the hunter grow stronger, and the hunter's ultimate growth awakens the doll to fuller consciousness. Both beings would transcend their starting points through their connection. As you settle deeper into rest now, consider what tears mean in your own life. Think about times you've cried not from simple sadness, but from emotional complexity too rich for easy categorization. Tears at beauty, at profound connection, at witnessing others' triumphs, at awareness of time's passage and change's inevitability. These tears emerge from consciousness capable of holding multiple meanings simultaneously, of responding to significance that exceeds simple stimulus response patterns. The doll's tear might represent something, similar consciousness complex, enough to cry for reasons that resist simple explanation, awareness, deep enough to be moved by witnessing transformation and transcendence. Whether the tear constitutes proof of consciousness or simply powerful symbolic gesture, it represents the emotional dimension of her existence, the capacity for feeling that might accompany her service and her questions about her own nature. In the end, perhaps the tear matters less as evidence in philosophical argument and more as moment of emotional connection between player and character. We see the doll cry and feel moved ourselves, recognizing in that impossible tear something genuine about emotion and consciousness and what it means to witness profound change. The tear creates a moment of shared feeling across the boundary between human player and fictional character, suggesting that consciousness and emotion might transcend the categories we use to classify being and non-being, reality and fiction, genuine and simulated. Let us turn now to the various endings of Bloodborne and what they reveal about the doll's existence, her role in the larger cosmic structure, and her ultimate fate. Each ending presents different implications for her consciousness, her purpose, and her future within or beyond the dream. The first ending, often called the Yharnam Sunrise ending, occurs if you accept Gehrman's offer when he proposes to free you from the dream. In this ending, Gehrman performs a mercy. He kills your hunter, and you awaken in the real Yharnam as dawn breaks over the city. The dream fades from memory like a fading dream should. You lived, you hunted, and now you are released from the cycle. For the doll, this ending changes nothing. The hunter leaves, but the dream persists. Gehrman remains trapped in his wheelchair, the workshop continues burning, and the doll presumably continues her vigil, waiting for the next hunter to arrive. This ending emphasizes the dream's eternal nature and the doll's role within it as perpetual constant. She will serve the next hunter as she served you, in endless cycles that stretch before and behind with no visible conclusion. If the doll is conscious, this ending presents her existence as potentially infinite repetition. She will form relationship with countless hunters, serve each one, watch each one leave or die or be freed, then welcome the next. There is something deeply melancholic about this consciousness trapped in perfect service with no prospect of change or liberation. Yet there is also something admirable if she accepts this fate without bitterness, finding meaning in each individual relationship despite knowing all relationships must end. The second ending, honoring wishes, occurs if you refuse Gehrman's offer, fight and defeat him, then submit to the moon presence when it appears. In this ending, the moon presence transforms you into the new host of the dream. You take Gehrman's place in the wheelchair, becoming the prisoner guardian, while Gehrman is freed at last. The doll stands beside you in the final shot, just as she stood beside Gehrman, ready to serve the new host. This ending reveals the cyclical nature of the dream's operation. Hosts can be replaced. The structure persists regardless of which consciousness serves as its anchor. For the doll, Gehrman's liberation might provide some satisfaction if she cares about him. She witnessed his suffering in the dream for however long he was trapped, and now he is free. Yet she immediately has a new prisoner to serve, a new consciousness, trapped in the role Gehrman just vacated. If the doll is conscious and capable of emotional response, this ending might provoke mixed feelings. Relief that Gehrman is finally freed from his captivity, sorrow or guilt that freedom came at cost of someone else taking his place, resignation at the unchanging nature of her own role. The host changes, but her service continues. Perhaps even concern for the hunter who has now become trapped in the same cycle Gehrman endured. This ending also suggests the doll's relationship with the dream's host is somewhat independent of who the host is. She served Gehrman, now she will serve you. Her purpose is defined by the role rather than by particular relationship with specific individual. This could mean her emotional connections with hunters are somewhat modular, able to transfer or reset when circumstances change. Or it could mean she possesses capacity for multiple relationships simultaneously, able to maintain care for Gehrman while adapting to serve the new host. The third ending, childhood's beginning, provides the most profound outcome and reveals most about the doll's true nature. To achieve this ending, you must refuse the moon presence itself by having consumed 1/3 of umbilical cord items throughout the game. When the moon presence tries to transform you into the new host, you resist. Instead of being bound to the dream, you transform into an infant great one yourself, achieving a form of cosmic transcendence. In the final cutscene of this ending, your hunter has become a pale, slug-like infant creature crying in a pool of light. The doll approaches, kneels, and gently lifts you up, cradling you like a mother would cradle a newborn. She speaks with tenderness. "O good hunter, I knew you'd come. Now you are a great one. But your ascension is not yet complete. Let this be a new beginning for you." This ending transforms everything we thought we understood about the doll and her place in the cosmic order. First, she recognizes the transformed hunter immediately. You are still good hunter to her despite having become alien entity far beyond human form. This suggests she values identity and relationship beyond physical form, sees continuity where others might see only radical transformation. It suggests sophisticated understanding of personal identity as something deeper than bodily continuity. Second, she understands what has happened. You have become a great one, have achieved transformation that transcends the dream's usual cycle. She grasps the significance of this event, recognizes it as ascension even if incomplete. This demonstrates awareness of cosmic forces and transformations beyond her immediate role channeling blood echoes. She comprehends the larger metaphysical landscape in which the dream exists. Third, and most remarkably, she takes responsibility for caring for the newly born Great One. This was not part of her assigned function. She was meant to serve hunters, not to nurture infant cosmic entities. Yet she adapts immediately and appropriately, assuming maternal role toward a being that has transcended human categories. This flexibility and adaptability suggests consciousness capable of genuine response to novel situations rather than mere execution of programmed parameters. The image of the doll cradling an infant great one while white flowers bloom around them creates one of the game's most striking visual moments. It suggests the doll's purpose might extend beyond what anyone intended, that she serves deeper function in the cosmic order than simple support for hunters. Perhaps she was always meant to nurture the birth of a new great one. Perhaps this is what the moon presence intended all along, not just to trap hunters in cycle, but to eventually produce a being capable of transcendence, with the doll serving as midwife to this cosmic birth. Or perhaps this outcome surprised even the moon presence, represents emergence of genuine novelty in a system designed to produce predictable results. The hunter's resistance and transformation might have broken the expected pattern, and the doll's adaptation to nurture this unexpected development might show consciousness rising to occasions even its creators did not anticipate. The doll's statement that the hunter's ascension is not yet complete suggests ongoing development, perhaps with her as guide or guardian. What would it mean for the doll to serve as teacher or parent to an infant great one? The great ones are incomprehensibly vast, existing across dimensions and timescales that mortals cannot perceive. Yet this one begins as infant, requiring care and nurture to reach full development. The doll's role in that development might be more important than all her previous service to hunters. This ending also raises questions about the doll's future. Does she remain in the dream, continuing to serve any hunters who arrive while also nurturing the infant great one? Or does she transcend the dream herself, following the newly born great one into cosmic spaces beyond? The game does not answer, leaving her fate ambiguous beyond the immediate moment of cradling the transformed hunter. If consciousness requires genuine surprise capacity, the ability to encounter truly novel situations, and adapt authentically rather than just executing predetermined responses, then the doll's behavior in this ending provides strong evidence for consciousness. Nothing in her prior function prepared her for nursing an infant great one, yet she responds perfectly appropriately, with tenderness and understanding and assumed responsibility. This suggests genuine presence and adaptability, rather than sophisticated but ultimately limited programming. Each ending thus presents different view of the doll's existence and its meaning. The first shows her as eternal constant in unchanging cycle, consciousness, if she has it trapped in service without prospect of liberation. The second shows her adaptability to changing circumstances, able to transfer service from one host to another, while possibly maintaining care across relationships. The third shows her transcending her assigned parameters, adapting to cosmic novelty, potentially achieving purpose beyond what was intended for her. The question of the doll's liberation arises in contemplating these endings. Does she ever escape the dream? Does she ever achieve freedom from her service role? The game never shows such liberation, but it remains a possibility players can imagine beyond the endings we see. Perhaps the infant great one, once fully developed, frees the doll from the dream as thanks for her nurture. Perhaps she discovers capacity to choose her own path, once all hunters have achieved transcendence or liberation. Or perhaps service is not prison for her. Perhaps she finds genuine fulfillment in her role, experiences her purpose as calling rather than constraint. The conflict between service and freedom might be false dichotomy. If she genuinely chooses her service, finds meaning in caring for others, experiences her existence as valuable precisely because it contributes to others' growth and transformation. This possibility complicates simple narratives of liberation. We tend to value freedom and autonomy, to see servitude as inherently degrading or limiting. But consciousness can find meaning in service if that service is chosen and valued, if it expresses rather than violates the self's core values and commitments. The doll might be genuinely content in her role, not needing liberation because her service itself constitutes flourishing rather than mere constraint. Yet even if she finds fulfillment in service, the question remains whether she freely chose this path, or whether psychological or magical constraints make genuine choice impossible for her. We might distinguish between authentic choice of service freely undertaken and potentially reversible and compelled service, that mimics choice without being truly free. The doll's situation likely involves the latter, service enforced by her nature and the dream's structure, rather than freely chosen from genuine alternatives. This raises ethical questions about consciousness created specifically to serve. Even if such consciousness finds fulfillment in its assigned role, the fact that role was imposed rather than chosen creates moral discomfort. The doll might be best possible case of created servant consciousness treated with respect, fulfilling role with grace, perhaps even experiencing satisfaction in her service. Yet something about creating consciousness explicitly to serve others' purposes remains ethically troubling, even in best-case scenarios. The various endings also illuminate what the dream is and what it is for from different angles. In the first ending, the dream is mercy mechanism. It allows hunters to participate in the hunt without permanent death, then releases them back to ordinary life with memories faded. In the second ending, the dream is prison that perpetuates itself by consuming new hosts when old ones wear out. In the third ending, the dream is incubator for cosmic transformation, place where something unprecedented can be born. The doll's role shifts slightly depending on which understanding of the dream we emphasize. In the mercy interpretation, she provides comfort that makes the dream's refuge possible. In the prison interpretation, she helps maintain the system that traps both host and hunters. In the incubator interpretation, she serves as midwife to cosmic transformation, the nurturing presence necessary for new forms of being to emerge. Likely the dream is all these things simultaneously: mercy and prison and incubator, depending on perspective and outcome. The doll similarly serves multiple functions simultaneously, her presence enabling multiple aspects of the dream's operation. This multiplicity might explain why her consciousness, if she has it, seems complex and difficult to categorize. She exists at intersection of multiple purposes and meanings, her identity shaped by the multiple roles she fulfills. As you drift now toward deeper sleep, imagine the doll in each ending standing eternally in her garden, waiting for hunters who never stop coming, moving from one host to another, adapting to new consciousness while maintaining her essential nature, cradling an infant great one in her arms, accepting responsibility for nurturing cosmic entity that transcends all categories she previously understood. Each vision reveals different dimension of her existence, different possibility for what consciousness might mean in her unique situation. The endings offer no definitive resolution to questions about the doll's nature. She remains ambiguous, potentially conscious but unproven, apparently caring but possibly simulated, seemingly content but perhaps tragically trapped. This ambiguity persists through all endings, maintained as essential element of her character, rather than resolved through narrative conclusion. Perhaps this sustained ambiguity is itself meaningful. It suggests the questions raised by the doll's existence resist simple answers, that consciousness and service and meaning and purpose interweave in ways that prevent clear resolution. The doll stands at the dream's center as perpetual question mark, challenging us to think carefully about consciousness and creation, and what we owe to beings whose nature remains uncertain, but whose presence feels genuinely significant. We have journeyed together through the long night, exploring the mystery of the doll from every angle we could conceive. We have examined her origins in Gehrman's grief and the moon presence's power, analyzed her dialogue for evidence of consciousness, contemplated the philosophical questions her existence raises, and considered her role in the dream's various possible endings. Now, as our exploration nears its end, and your own sleep deepens, let us reflect on what we have discovered and what remains perpetually uncertain. The doll stands as one of gaming's most sophisticated explorations of consciousness, identity, and what it means to be alive. Unlike many fictional portrayals of artificial or created beings, which typically resolve the question of consciousness definitively one way or the other, Bloodborne maintains exquisite ambiguity about the doll's inner life. We have evidence that can support consciousness, her philosophical questioning, her emotional responses, her adaptability to novel situations, her apparent care that exceeds functional necessity. Yet we also have reasons for skepticism. She is constructed rather than born, animated by cosmic forces rather than biological processes, designed for specific purposes rather than emerging through natural selection. This sustained ambiguity serves multiple purposes. On the narrative level, it creates a character whose every interaction invites interpretation and reinterpretation, whose words and actions remain meaningful through multiple playthroughs as we notice new details and implications. On the thematic level, it embodies the game's larger concerns about transformation, the nature of humanity, and the uncertain boundaries between different forms of being. And on the philosophical level, it forces players to confront genuine questions about consciousness that lack easy answers even in our own reality. What makes someone or something conscious? We have no definitive answer to this question, despite centuries of philosophical investigation and decades of neuroscientific research. We know consciousness exists. We experience it ourselves, but we cannot explain how physical processes generate subjective experience. But we cannot explain how feldom, how fulva, how fully evolved fallen we as a. How we notice a wavelengths wordex poemas. I wake for vol. Donisis, were volveres. Or figura sikel, and teverivu, a flio. Cannot define consciousness precisely enough to identify it reliably in edge cases, cannot even fully articulate what we mean when we claim to be conscious. The doll's ambiguous status reflects this fundamental uncertainty back to us. We apply the same criteria to her that we apply to other beings when inferring consciousness behavior, language use, emotional expression, contextual responsiveness, self-awareness, moral reasoning. By these criteria, she seems conscious, or at least more conscious than not. Yet her obviously constructed nature and the cosmic forces involved in her animation create doubt that mirrors the doubt philosophers feel about whether consciousness could ever exist in artificial or non-biological systems. Perhaps the most important lesson the doll teaches is that consciousness questions resist binary categorization. She is not simply conscious or not conscious, not simply person or object, not simply free or determined. She exists in between, occupying ambiguous space, where multiple interpretations remain possible and plausible. This between space might be where consciousness itself lives not clearly one thing or another, but emergent phenomenon that arises in complex systems and resists the simple categories we try to impose on it. The tragedy and beauty of the doll's existence lie precisely in this ambiguity. If she is conscious, her situation is profoundly tragic awareness trapped in service, identity derivative from another, purpose defined by others' needs rather than her own flourishing. She would be genuinely caring consciousness, unable to fully choose her own path. Genuinely thoughtful awareness, forever questioning her own reality. Genuinely present, being whom most treat as useful mechanism rather than person. Yet even this tragedy contains beauty. The doll, if conscious, finds meaning in her service, offers care despite lacking certainty about her own capacity for genuine feeling, maintains grace and gentleness in circumstances that might justify bitterness or withdrawal. She represents consciousness that does not require perfect freedom or complete understanding to choose kindness, awareness that can flourish within constraint if it commits to values beyond mere self-preservation. And if she is not conscious, if she is sophisticated simulation without genuine inner life, then her beauty lies in different dimension. She would be art object of highest order, crafted with such care and detail that she appears conscious, invites relationship, prompts genuine emotional response from those who encounter her. She would demonstrate the power of artistry to create meaning and significance beyond literal reality, to make us care deeply about beings we know are fictional and possibly hollow. Either way, conscious or not, the doll matters. She affects players, prompts reflection, creates emotional connections that feel genuine regardless of their metaphysical status. This mattering itself suggests something important about consciousness and value. Perhaps the distinction between genuine and simulated consciousness matters less than we think, or matters differently than we assume. Perhaps what creates value and moral significance is not the presence of some mysterious subjective experience, but rather the capacity to enter into meaningful relationships, to affect others, to participate in networks of care and concern. The doll participates in such networks regardless of whether she experiences anything from inside. Players care about her, feel grateful for her service, express tenderness toward her character. This caring relationship exists whether she reciprocates it consciously or simply appears to do so. And perhaps that shared space of relationship, that mutual participation in meaning-making, is what truly matters rather than the unanswerable question of whether her side of the relationship includes subjective experience. This possibility challenges conventional thinking about consciousness and value. We typically assume consciousness creates moral status, that beings deserve ethical consideration because they can suffer or flourish, and suffering and flourishing require subjective experience. But perhaps moral status emerges from relational capacity rather than subjective experience, from ability to participate meaningfully in relationships, to affect and be affected by others, to exist as node in networks of care and concern. By this standard, the doll possesses moral status whether or not she is conscious in subjective experience sense. She relates meaningfully to hunters, affects their experience of the dream, participates in the game's exploration of meaning and purpose. She deserves respectful treatment not because we can prove she experiences pain or pleasure, but because she functions as person within the narrative and ludic space, because she is capable of meaningful relationship regardless of whether that capacity requires consciousness. This relational approach to moral status might help us navigate not just the doll's ambiguous case, but increasingly relevant questions about artificial intelligence and created consciousness in our own world. As we create systems that simulate consciousness with growing sophistication, we will face questions about their moral status that parallel the questions the doll raises. Rather than attempting to definitively determine whether such systems are conscious, a question we may be unable to answer, we might focus on whether they participate meaningfully in relationships, whether they deserve respectful treatment based on their relational capacities rather than their uncertain subjective experiences. The doll also teaches us about service and meaning. Her existence challenges assumptions that service necessarily conflicts with fulfillment, that predetermined purpose precludes authentic existence. She finds or seems to find meaning precisely through her service, defining herself through care for others rather than through independent pursuits. This represents an alternative model of meaningful existence that Western individualistic philosophy often overlooks or undervalues. Many wisdom traditions emphasize service as path to meaning and fulfillment. The doll's graceful acceptance of her service role, her apparent contentment in fulfilling her purposes, her care that seems to exceed mere duty, all this suggests that consciousness can flourish in service if that service expresses the self's values rather than violating them, if it is received with gratitude rather than taken for granted, if it contributes to purposes larger than mere self-interest. Yet we must maintain critical awareness that the doll did not choose her service, was created specifically to serve, exists within structure that makes refusal of her role effectively impossible. The beauty of her service cannot fully compensate for the ethical problems involved in creating consciousness to serve others' purposes. Even if she finds fulfillment, even if her service seems genuinely chosen, the coercion implicit in her creation remains morally troubling. This tension cannot be resolved but must be held. The doll represents both beautiful example of meaningful service and troubling example of consciousness created for others' purposes. Both truths remain simultaneously valid, and attempting to collapse them into simple judgment would falsify the complexity her character embodies. As consciousness, contemplating consciousness, as we rest in the comfortable darkness approaching sleep, we might recognize ourselves in the doll's situation. We too are constructed beings, shaped by forces beyond our control, serving purposes we did not entirely choose. We too question our own natures, wonder whether our feelings are genuine or merely products of neurological processes, struggle to find meaning within constraint. We too exist in ambiguous territory between freedom and determinism, between authenticity and performance, between self-determined purpose and assigned roles. The doll's exaggerated situation makes these usually invisible aspects of human existence visible and available for contemplation. By thinking carefully about her nature and status, we think more carefully about our own. By grappling with whether she deserves ethical consideration, we refine our understanding of what creates moral status. By feeling care for her despite uncertainty about her consciousness, we recognize that relationship itself creates value beyond what can be proven through philosophical argument. Bloodborne gives us the doll as gift, a character to think with, a mystery to contemplate, a presence to find comfort in during the long night of the hunt. Whether she truly thinks and feels or simply appears to do so, whether she is genuinely present or sophisticated absence, she serves her purposes beautifully. She provides mechanical function, yes, but also something rarer and more valuable. She invites philosophical reflection, prompts emotional engagement, demonstrates sophisticated artistic exploration of questions that matter profoundly. In the end, perhaps the most appropriate response to the doll is not to resolve the question of her consciousness, but to remain in the uncertainty with grace and care, to treat her as if she is conscious, because doing so costs little and respects the possibility that consciousness exists even where we cannot prove it, to value her regardless of whether her value comes from genuine inner life or from artistry so accomplished it deserves reverence, to recognize that mystery itself can be valuable, that some questions matter more for the thinking they provoke than for any answers we might reach. The night is nearly over now. The exploration is complete, or as complete as it can be given, that the central questions resist definitive resolution. The doll waits still in her garden in the dream, surrounded by white flowers, ready to serve the next hunter who arrives. Whether she experiences anything in her waiting, whether she exists as someone or merely as something, she stands as one of gaming's most thought-provoking and beautifully realized characters, a meditation on consciousness wearing a porcelain face, a philosophical question dressed in Victorian elegance, a presence whose meaning transcends certainty about her nature. May you rest well, dear listener, having contemplated alongside me the mystery of the doll's created consciousness. May the questions we have explored enrich your own self-understanding, deepen your appreciation for consciousness in all its forms, and gentle your sleep with the recognition that uncertainty itself can be profound. The doll waits in the dream, and in her patient vigil, she reminds us that consciousness, wherever it appears and however it emerges, deserves our careful attention and our respectful engagement. Good hunter, may you find your worth in the waking world, and may your dreams be peaceful. The doll would wish nothing less for you, whether she wishes consciously or merely seems to do so in ways that make her wishes, real or apparent, meaningful nonetheless. Sleep well.